You arrive as the day loosens its grip, when the blue on Table Mountain thins like rinsed linen, and the wind that lives here formal, brisk, endlessly opinionated, presses your coat flat against your ribs. The mayor's barn waits where the lane bows a little, a broad-hipped silhouette with doors rubbed smooth by years of practical hands, the thatch along the eaves combed by the same wind that tells everyone what to do. You lift the iron ring, feel its night-cold advice, and ease the door wide enough to step through without letting the whole sky in. Wood answers wood with a careful sigh. Inside is the color of late dusk, layered with straw, timber, and the slow, agreeable breath of animals that have already made their peace with evening. You stand still while the interior arranges itself around your eyes. The loft crouches low, remembering the day's sun in splinters. The floor is a plain of trampled hay, broken by little islands of untroubled heaps. A rake leans like a tired soldier. A rope coils in a thoughtful circle. To your left, an ox completes a private thought and breathes, the steady piston of its lungs settling the boards underfoot. You make the traveler's inventory, where to lay your head, where not to step, where the shyest draft makes itself larger than its reputation. You choose a corner that looks like it has forgotten arguments and remembers only sleep. You kneel and scratch a shallow nest from the straw. The hay crackles a polite warning about its thorns, and you apologize anyway, because it seems proper to begin courteously. You spread your blanket, the one that learned your shape weeks ago, and invite it to remember. The door you left ajar has been a bright knife. You close it to a dull seam and listen while the wind tries each board with careful fingers. Its hand still reaches you, a dry brush across your cheek, as if to say it knows better than anyone how nights should be conducted here. From town comes the hum of evening lanterns coaxed awake, a cart choosing between one rut and another, a voice rehearsing laughter for the tavern. Above you, pigeons hold committee on the rafters, with the diplomacy of soft feet and throats full of vowels. You tilt your head, map the reach of their more emphatic minutes, and adjust your nest an inch. Even small wisdom counts when you plan to sleep under opinions with wings. A cat that belongs to no one, and therefore to everyone, pads past your boot, pauses to approve your stillness, and moves on. A modest official on inspection. You drink from the water you brought, tasting wood and travel. It is not cold, but it is honest. A little poured into your palm wipes the day's dust from your face, and returns it to the world where it belongs. The barn's air is layered. New hay sweet and green at the edges, old straw patient and workmanlike, a ribbon of manure that has minded its manners, and a top note almost like sea salt, as if the wind stopped by the harbor and collected stories before it found you. You breathe it in, the whole humble orchestra, until it sounds like quiet. One plain truth keeps you company. In this century, the Cape serves the Dutch East India Company as a refreshment station, watering and provisioning fleets that drop anchor before chasing the edge of the map again. With them come sailors, drovers, clerks, and wanderers. With them, any roof that forgives snoring becomes valuable. The barn is not an inn, and will never pretend, but it is an answer for walls that do not mind your name, and a floor willing to be patient about your dreams. You thank the boards under your breath for their hospitality, and try the pillow again, instructing your coat to perform better than it did last night. You train your coat into the idea of a pillow. It has other plans. You fold it again, make a compromise, then slip a flat stone beneath to persuade it into leadership. The stone works better than pride. From your pocket, you bring a small sprig of crushed leaves and rub them along your wrists and neck. The scent is sharp and clean, a little garden in the dark. People here swear by these leaves, buchu from the hills, the name carried from Khoi tongues tucked into bedding or steeped, to sweeten straw and dissuade the tiny citizens of the night. It is a habit that makes poor quarters smell less argumentative. The barn inventories itself while you settle. A knot in the timber clicks as it cools. A rope exhales. The cat returns, weighs your ankle in the balance, and approves of your continued cooperation with the notion of rest. You arrange your legs, then rearrange them for reasons your legs keep to themselves. The straw beneath your ear reports on seeds, stems, and the single burr with ambitions on your scalp. You relocate it and congratulate yourself for diplomacy. Peace is often one burr away. The wind, still diligent, studies the gaps along the boards, chooses a favorite, and sends a thin ribbon of advice across your blanket. Somewhere a watchman gives the night a wooden opinion with his rattle, and a dog of good character answers. A bell, unsure of its hour, counts what light remains. You consider food and decide hunger can be taught manners too, at least until morning. Your hands find their way into warmth under the blanket, as if that had been the plan all along. Breaths shorten into even lengths. Sleep, courteous, stands in the doorway and waits until you notice it. When you do, it steps in without noise and chooses a chair in the corner to sit and supervise. Before your eyes close, you allow yourself a thought about the nature of this kindness. How many travelers have done this in this very place? Is the mayor's barn a regular practice, or just your good fortune tonight? You do not know. Scholars do not really know either. Historians still argue whether civic officers at the Cape routinely opened public outbuildings to passers-by, or whether such nights depended on private favor, with evidence thin in diaries and council papers, and always reluctant to say what happened most of the time. The uncertainty is gentle. It does not disturb the blanket. You turn on your side. The mountain becomes a feeling instead of a shape. A cool shoulder leaned against the sky beyond the wall. The town narrows its noises until they pass one at a time through the cracks and fray themselves on the straw. Your lips keep the clean bite of the leaf you rub there without thinking. You tell your toes to behave, and they do, briefly. Your shoulders drop by small decisions, each one a coin paid to drowsiness. You count 4 breaths, the way you might count coins when you are trying to be optimistic, and you miss the 5th on purpose. Sleep, when it settles, is not a sail dropping all at once, but a cloth lowered by unhurried hands. The barn learns your breathing and approves. The ox, kindly indifferent to the concerns of men, steps once in its stall and then forgets about you. Outside, the southeaster makes its rounds in the lanes and at last finds a task more interesting than the gap under your door. It leaves you with a draft that cannot make up its mind and a corner of blanket that finally agrees to cover your shoulder. Pigeons fuss, rearrange their dignity, and are quiet again. You empty the last busy thought from your head into the straw here. Keep this, and the straw accepts it with the softest sound. Your hands rest in the small cave of warm air you have made for them. You close your eyes not decisively but politely, as if you are allowing the dark to do its work. It does. And in the mayor's barn, a place larger than your needs and smaller than your wishes, you begin the simple labor of sleeping. The gate answers your hand with a patient groan, the sound of old iron behaving itself. A man who has been leaning on the post straightens without surprise. His coat is the color of work, his hat pushed back, and his candle a small stub steadied in a tin. He is the steward tonight, the sort of person a place trusts when the wind grows opinionated. He tips his chin toward the interior, where straw lies in soft humps, and the boards hold a long day's breath. You step in. The door settles behind you with a softer version of the same thought. Rules arrive, as if he were reciting a grace. No flame near hay, no pipe, no stray ember. Lanterns sleep when the pigeons do. Boots by your blanket in your corner. If you wake early, wake quietly. Food wrapped twice, or the cats will argue and the mice will vote. Water jug by the middle post, ladle tucked beneath. The washing basin sits outside under the drip of the thatch. It's a barn, he says, and the word carries its own instruction. You take each rule like a small stone placed in your palm. When habit draws your hand toward your tinderbox, his head moves before your fingers finish the thought. He lowers his candle into a saucer of damp sand. The flame steadies and seems to feel watched. Straw makes friends with fire too quickly. First a whisper, then a speech, then an argument nobody wins. The air is hay and ox, and an old sweetness like dried apples. You let it become the shape of your breath. One plain fact pulls up a stool. The Cape, this century, is a refreshment station for passing fleets of the Dutch East India Company, and where company order meets thatch and timber, fire becomes everybody's business. Watchmen rattle through the streets at night. Buckets and ladders wait where hands can find them without looking. Public rooms trust the moon more than a careless flame. Barns learn first and teach the rest. He points with the hand that is not holding his light, naming corners as if they have personalities. By the ladder quiet if you don't mind birds. Near the door easy to leave, reluctant to keep warm. By the ox heat with opinions. Complaints turned into options sit more calmly in the mind. You choose the corner that looks least argumentative. He nods. A quiet victory. While you spread your blanket, he finishes the litany. The big door will thump when the wind remembers it. Tie it if you like, but the wind's memory is better than your knot. Pigeons announce their late reconsiderations with soft feet and louder feathers. A cart after midnight will be a baker's boy performing early. Do not let him in unless you wish to share the wind with the entire world. If someone coughs like a saw, a small pot of dried buchu leaves sits by the post, crush a pinch and breathe kinder air. He adds a charm that costs nothing. Slip a copper coin beneath a candle dish to cool a flame, he murmurs. Or ring the base with a pinch of damp sand. Some swear the sand thinks faster than fire if the world tips. He smiles without mocking the idea. Tiny rituals keep the night arranged even when logic refuses to dress for the occasion. He asks your name and the town you came from, and writes both on a slate by the door with letters neat but unhurried. Your coins pass from your pocket to his palm and into a purse tied to his belt. He takes them like a person completing a step in a dance. 1 night certain, he says. 2 if the rain insists. 3 if the fleet is late and rooms vanish before breakfast. Your chosen corner receives you without ceremony. The steward's candle becomes a small star while he makes a last round, correcting what needs it. A broom too casual, a latch that prefers an extra finger, a rope that thinks it is finished coiling. Almost at the door, he turns back, lifts a hand in a little benediction of remember, and sighs the candle out between damp fingers. Darkness folds itself, and the barn learns your outline. In the dark, the rules settle among the sleepers like a fifth blanket, the one that does not warm you, but keeps the drafts organized. You attempt your coat as a pillow. It is stiffer than your hopes, and exactly as helpful as yesterday. You fold, roll, argue, and reach a truce slightly better than none. You tuck your hands into the small cave your chest keeps, and listen, while the building speaks in wood and rope and straw. Another modest fact drifts up while you count breaths. Pipes are outdoor creatures in places where roofs are tinder and wind is busy. At the Cape, smoking prefers thresholds and yards. Sparks are treated like guests of questionable habit, welcomed only where someone watches. Your tinderbox stays shut and learns humility. Uncertainty, useful and polite, takes a chair at the edge of your bed. People call this the mayor's barn because a single name is easier to carry. Offices here wear other titles, and more than one hand holds the rope. Company officers, magistrates, councilmen, householders with more roof than family. Historians still argue whether a space like this would answer to a civic ledger, a private kindness, or a little of both. The argument is not loud. It leaves the straw undisturbed. By the time the pigeons resettle and the watchman's rattle becomes a rumor, the lesson is complete. No flame near hay. Boots by blanket. Quiet when you wake. You rehearse the lines the way you rehearse a prayer, not to change the world, but to soften the person moving through it. Your shoulder remembers how to unclench by small degrees, as if easing a stubborn knot with patience instead of force. The wind finds its favorite gap and lowers its voice. You let your eyes close the way a book closes on a finger ready to open again if called, content to rest if not. The steward's steps fade into the walls. Your coat pillow accepts its duties for now. The rules, memorized without effort, keep their quiet watch over straw and over the tired, ordinary hopes people bring here night after night. You breathe the slightly sweet dark and promise without sound to do nothing at all until morning asks nicely. You borrow the steward's light while there is still permission for it, the small candle riding in a dented tin saucer like a polite moon allowed indoors. He kneels beside you without hurry. The flame pours a narrow river across the straw and shows you what the dark would rather keep to itself. Burrs pretended into kindness, thistles with speeches prepared, seed heads that seem soft until a rib disagrees. You work at ground level where truth lives, sorting with the pads of your fingers pinch, sift, shake, until the straw begins to accept the idea of being a bed. You pull the long stalks free and lay them one way, then cross them with shorter pieces, weaving a nest the way you might mend a mood, taking out what refuses to lie down and forgiving what will never be perfect. Where the floor dips into a shallow bowl, you pack extra. Where a knot in the board insists on being noticed, you lay a springy cushion and suggest other topics. The steward moves the light only when you nod. Your knees learn the country of the planks, and your hands learn the accent of the chaff. You test with the back of your hand so thistles confess without pricking your palms. Seeds cling to your sleeve like polite beggars. You shake them loose and line the edge of your nest with the least argumentative stalks, all their cut ends pointing outward to make a low hedge that keeps the blanket where you want it. Beneath, the boards keep a measured breath. Above, the rafters sit in their patient dark. The candle's round glow drifts, and you follow it, collecting small improvements the way a careful person collects buttons. A plain fact sits beside you while you choose. Here in 18th century Cape Town, thick thatch rides many roofs, barns, byres, and long lime-washed houses with their proud gables. And with thatch comes strict suspicion of flame. The rule is older than most arguments. No fire near hay. Barns learn it first, inns learn it after, and households relearn it each windy season. The steward's candle is a chaperoned guest. When your bed is ready, the light will be thanked and shown outside to continue its business with the night. You lay your blanket over the fresh hill and smooth it with long, slow strokes, teaching cloth to remember summer. A stone the weight of a loaf goes under your coat, not at the neck but a hand's breadth below the shoulder, the place last week taught you so the pillow keeps its discipline. You fold the collar until it agrees to be kind. Then you lace the bundle with a narrow braided tie, a habit learned from a drover who said knots sleep better when they have company. The coat considers the arrangement and pretends it was its idea. Soft road customs arrive, as they always do when beds are being made. You bruise a pinch of fragrant buchu leaves and fan the green scent through the straw where your wrists and ankles will rest. People here swear it sweetens the bedding and discourages the tiny citizens of the night. Someone once told you to slip a copper beneath a pillow to pay the darkness in advance. Another swore by a sliver of vinegar dipped bread crumbled into the hay. You have leaves and thread. Your coppers belong to tomorrow's bread, and vinegar belongs to someone else's supper, so the leaves win. You look up because the candle makes everything feel nearer. A winnowing fan leans against a post like a folded wing. A flail naps in the corner, its leather soft with use. The steward's hat hangs from a peg like a tame moon. Above, pigeons negotiate their late arrangements with agreeable vowels and soft feet. They choose a beam that is not yours, and you tilt your pillow one polite inch farther away in reply. He approves without words, and lowers the light so shadows lie flatter, and the rafters relax. Another steady truth writes itself across the floor. Pallets like this belong wherever the company's road touches fields. At the Cape, straw comes from the same harvest that warms the stalls oaten when a year is generous, coarser stock when it is not. Level matters more than luxury. You rake the surface with the edge of your hand, as if smoothing icing, then sit and test it with honest weight. Your hip protests and receives a small hill. Your shoulder requests a tilt toward morning and is granted one. Your knees are content so long as the blanket behaves. Uncertainty pulls up its usual chair. Diaries here are full of winds, ships, and prices, and nearly silent about the grammar of bedding. Historians still argue whether hosts kept separate bundles for travelers, reshuffled yesterday's straw each evening, or simply pointed to a corner and wished a newcomer luck. The record turns its head toward the mountain and refuses to help. You answer by making the bed as if you owned the barn. Better to build your comfort than lean on somebody else's memory of it. You practice lying down. First the cheek, then the shoulder, then the slow, patient tilt of the spine until your weight becomes an even idea. You discover that warmth now has a kinder opinion. The knot has been persuaded to move 2 inches to the left, and the pillow accepts its duties if you speak to it in a reasonable tone. The steward, convinced by your conversation with straw, spreads a thin necklace of damp sand around the saucer. Sand thinks faster than fire if the world tips, he murmurs. An old superstition with a good memory and no harm in it. Your shoes, 2 small animals that behaved all day, are set heel to heel by the blanket, with their toes pointing toward the dawn you cannot yet see. The rags that kept their shape are shaken clean at the threshold. Socks hang to remember the idea of dryness. You slip under the blanket for a rehearsal and listen to what the bed says back. Knees content, hip converted, shoulder persuaded, feet forgiven. Your hands keep the sharp, clean edge of buchu. and the candle warms your eyelids without being allowed to claim responsibility. When everything that can be done has been done, the steward clears his throat the candle's signal. You look once more at the small country you have made, a hummock smoothed by patient hands, edges neat, blanket taught to lie quietly, coat tied into courage. He lifts the saucer, and the light travels one last time across your chosen ground, bright as a benediction. Then his damp fingers meet above the wick. Darkness pours in, even and soft, as if the night had been waiting outside with excellent manners. The wind returns to its usual games at the gaps. A piece of straw near your ear tells another piece of straw, a very short story. Somewhere a mouse changes its mind about a journey. You lie still and notice the difference the work has made. Warmth is more democratic. The cat gives you a passing approval with a tail that does not flick. The rafters stop taking attendance. Your breath lengthens into the kind of count that tells the barn you intend to cause no trouble at all. One last counter-melody of odd advice drifts through as you float between thinking and not thinking. A copper under the pillow to pay the night. A single blue thread in the blanket's corner to teach dreams the way home. A sliver of soap tucked into straw to shame fleas into repentance. Choose what costs nothing and leave the rest for people with vinegar. The pallet forgives your weight. The thatch above keeps its counsel. Sleep, who never hurries, will find the path you have cleared of burrs and opinions. The wind finds you the way it finds everyone in this town, by learning your name from the gaps in the boards and pronouncing it with a dry mouth. It does not ask permission. It threads the straw and lifts it one pale blade at a time, discovering your blanket's loose edge with the thrift of a shopkeeper, counting change. The people here call this Southeaster the Cape Doctor, and tonight the doctor is making rounds, tapping every hinge, peering into every seam, clearing the air with brisk manners that never quite include warmth. Your blanket rises a finger's width, then lies down as if it had reconsidered and agreed to be sensible. You lie on your side and feel where the boards admit the world in long, steady lines. The wind travels the length of your legs, a fellow passenger demanding the aisle. You turn so that your knees make a gate and your ankles keep hours. The straw under your cheek rustles and becomes a kind of map. Here is a dip in the floor where the gusts gather. Here is the ridge where they split and pass. You pull the blanket to your ear, then fold the corner back for breathing, because sense prefers companions. The barn joins the conversation in wood. The door, large and persuasive, thumps the jamb with the patience of a tutor reminding a lesson. The latch murmurs. The hinge replies with a small metal cough. Overhead, the thatch keeps its own counsel, but the eaves gossip with the wind in a language of whisk and hush. The ox in the stall shifts and offers a damp breath you can almost see, which the wind takes, trims, and returns as a cooler version of the same thought. Your pillow, the ambitious coat, tries to escape. You take it in hand, retie the plaited cord, and remind it quietly that staying is part of its duty. A plain fact sits up and adjusts its spectacles. In this place and century, the southeaster blows hardest when the summer thinks it has the right to everything, and when it slides over Table Mountain, it often pulls a white cloth behind it, a long table linen of cloud that drapes the flat top, as if someone were setting a meal for the sky. People smile at that tablecloth, then hold their hats. The wind clears smoke, dries laundry far too quickly, scours dust from streets only to give it back in other corners, and polishes tempers until they are thin enough to see light through. You accept that the doctor is efficient, and that efficiency is not always a bedside manner. You practice small domestic medicines that make no claim beyond comfort. Your shoes, set heel to heel beside the blanket, become doorstops on the windward side, their honest weight holding the hem where it prefers to dance. You slide your extra rag between two boards, the way you saw a groom do, and the whistle lowers itself to a whisper. You roll a palmful of straw into a tight little sausage and tuck it along the small of your back where a chill had begun to argue. The straw lets you win because you asked politely. Your hands still carry the green scent of crushed buchu. You bring your wrists to your nose and breathe until the sharpness convinces you that the world has edges you can trust. Your mouth dries faster than your patience. You swallow and feel the wind take that too, as if it were entitled to all liquids. The shared jug sits by the post where the steward promised. You slip from under the blanket and find it by counting steps. then by the taste of iron and old wood on your fingers. The water is no colder than your breath, but it pretends, and the pretense is welcome. Back under the blanket, you draw the edge over the bridge of your nose and leave a narrow slot for air. The wind investigates and, snubbed, goes to find someone easier to interview. The pigeons above do not mind the wind the way you do. They tuck their heads into the ready hollow between shoulder and wing, pull their feet up into dignity, and pretend that drafts are a problem for people who do not have feathers. One of them gives you a soft, indignant remark when the gust picks up and wanders along the rafters. The remark is not for you, but you accept it on behalf of the party of humans below, whose blankets are never large enough, and whose socks always learn humility at the coldest hour. The doctor purses its lips and whistles along the edge of the door. You count the intervals between thumps, expecting a pattern that never quite forms. The rattle of the watchman's instrument reaches the lane, a wooden warning to sparks and mischief. The wind dissects that too and brings you only the tail, a thin tap that sounds like a fingernail on a glass. You tell your toes that this is the sort of weather that makes bread dry faster tomorrow, and sheets iron themselves without you. Your toes object, and then behave. Quieter, veteran advice wanders in from other travelers you have known. Someone once said you could pin a length of damp cloth along a door's bottom to teach a draft new manners. Another swore by sprinkling a pinch of salt on the threshold to feed the wind, so it eats at the right place. A sailor told you that a rope hung just so from a peg would cut a whistle in half. You do not have rope to spare, and your salt belongs to porridge, but you wet the corner of a rag at the water jug and flatten it under the gap. The whistle lowers itself, not defeated, merely bored by your stubbornness. The mountain is only a shape now, but your skin knows where it is. The southeaster slides down its shoulder and across the plain and finds openings, because that is what it was born for. Whether the nickname Cape Doctor belonged to the wind already in your century, or arrived later, is one of those details that keeps scholars writing marginal notes. Historians still argue whether the term was common parlance in the 18th century, or gained its wide and affectionate use in the next. The record's windy with weather and stingy with nicknames. You accept both possibilities and choose the one that makes the night humor you. Sleep tries the door and waits. You give it small encouragements. The blanket tucked under the chin with two careful fingers, the knees arranged so that bones agree to be neighbors, the neck introduced to the pillow as if to a respectable stranger whose hands are clean. Your breaths lengthen into a count you do not intend to finish. Each exhale sands the edges of your thoughts until they are as smooth as a beach stone. The wind tries the same trick on the barn. The barn, older and more patient, keeps its corners. The dark thickens in place. The doctor makes one more round, straightening the air, tidying the small unruliness that evening leaves behind, and then settles into a steady supervision that no longer needs to prove itself. Your face warms the square of blanket that has elected to serve as a tent. The air under it smells like straw that has learned manners and clean leaves that have learned how to be generous. Your fingers forget what they were meant to hold. Your eyes remember how to close without instruction. When you drift the way a board settles after a day's heat, with no hurry and fewer intentions. The wind can have whatever it wants that you are not using. You keep your place, your measured breath, and the small civility of a bed that forgives you for having bones. Outside, somewhere beyond the barn and the lane, and the first row of lime-washed houses, the mountain wears its evening cloth and pretends not to notice the town, pretending not to notice the wind. Inside, your blanket holds its line, and you belong to a quiet the weather cannot edit. You measure the night the way a cook measures spice, by what it leaves on the air. The first scent is straw, uncomplicated and earnest, the green memory of a field made tidy with a blade. It arrives warm from the day's hands, then settles into a dry sweetness like flour that has learned patience. Beneath that, older straw talks more slowly, with a seller's voice and the faint suggestion of cupboards where apples once waited for winter. Your blanket borrows these gentler notes and returns them to you as a thin, honest comfort. Then the ox speaks without words, not the crude sort of speaking, just the rounded warmth of an animal that has lived inside work all day, hide, hay dust, and a trace of damp that a pail and a brush will correct in the morning. It is a smell with manners and a memory of grass. You breathe it and discover it has edges you can lean on. Your stomach, not fully asleep, classifies it as useful and leaves the matter alone. Tar comes next, the old soldier of every port, recognizable with your eyes closed. It is in the ropes that learned salt before they learned your name, in the wagon axles that refuse to squeal, and in the seams of barrels that hate surprises. Tar does not whisper. It states policy. One brush with it, and your hands carry a sermon the rest of the week. You smell it and see the harbor even without seeing the harbor. Posts glossed black, rails that shine when the sun needs them, and a man with a pot and a brush dismissing weather with a shrug. The fourth layer moves like a thinner shadow. Oil from fish, called train oil by people who handle it, and something ruder by people who do not. It lingers wherever barrels pause to consider their destinations, a narrow ribbon of sea breath and work. You take it in with resignation and discover you can live with it, the way a sailor can live with the taste of salt on every loaf. It promises lamplight somewhere and winter leather that does not admit rain. Your nose keeps a small, sensible distance and agrees to be civil. Then the ghost of wine appears, catching you from a direction you were not watching. It is the sweet and sour whisper of casks in storage or transit, the last sigh of a shipment that taught wood how to remember grapes. It hides in staves that the cooper will reuse because wood, like a good proverb, should serve more than once. You could almost taste it if you were less polite. Dried fruit and sun, a suggestion of something green, and the neat sour tang that lives where sealed things were and are not now. The breath of wine hangs there as if embarrassed to be caught in a barn. A plain fact sets itself down on the edge of your blanket and smooths its apron. Vineyards have been laid here since the century before, and in your own time, Constantia wines carry the Cape's name into Europe's fine rooms, praised by people who use more adjectives than you require. Coopers earn their bread, rolling staves and tapping hoops. Barrels travel full of one thing and come back full of another, so a barn near town learns to speak in the dialect of cask, even when it would rather say hay. The air remembers cargo the way a ledger remembers debts. All these smells stack themselves like folded shirts, and you move your head a little to read them in order. Near the floor, straw and ox. Higher, tar, then oil, and somewhere drifting through, the courteous ghost of wine. You find that if you breathe small, the layers keep their lanes. But if you sigh, everything discovers an intention to mingle. Your blanket takes sides and chooses straw. Your pillow, being a coat, prefers tar. Your hands still carry the ghost of crushed leaves from earlier, and that green, sharp edge cuts a window in the mixture large enough for your patience. Small knowledge from travelers wanders in with its pockets full of tricks. Someone once taught you to tuck a twist of stale bread into a space with difficult odors. Bread drinks the air, she said, and gives it back cleansed when it has had its fill. You do not pretend to understand how eating happens between a loaf and a room, but the trick has a friendly face. You tear a heel into two quiet pieces and slide them toward the corners that seem to vote for oil and tar. If nothing else, the bread keeps mice politely occupied with a dilemma, which is already a service. Another thread of learning arrives, with flame you are not allowed to use now but remember from afternoons. To sweeten a cask, or keep rot-minded spirits from having ideas, coopers burn a sulfur match inside a rinsed barrel, the smoke writing a quick, hygienic sentence on the wood. You picture the pale twist, the shy blue flame, the lid set back like a hat for a moment. That smell lives in the memory of staves even when they carry other duties. It joins the wine's ghost and becomes a little bell you only hear when the wind pauses. You turn on your back and find the air above your face different from the air by your knees. A barn organizes smells by height, the way a pantry organizes jars by size. Dust sits halfway up like a patient congregation, visible tomorrow when the sun writes scripture through the cracks. Oil keeps near the ground, practical and heavy. Tar rises when warmed, then cools and remembers how to fall. Wine waits wherever wood waited longer. Your nose, that short scholar, compiles notes and, feeling pleased with itself, becomes less argumentative. Uncertainty, always polite when invited, draws up a stool and keeps its voice low. Historians still argue whether the oil in barns like this, within no shot of Cape Town itself, drifted more from casks bound for lamps and leather in town or from the broader traffic of whaling and sealing that grew and shrank with years and markets. Records that count barrels rarely note where air kept the tally. You accept the ambiguity the way you accept weather reel. A little stubborn, and none of your business at this hour. The ox sighs, a rope settles, and a pigeon mutters an opinion that praises no one. Your mouth holds the taste of wood and a little tar. Your tongue forgives both. You pull the blanket an inch higher, then let it fall that same inch, because breathing prefers neat arithmetic. Somewhere under the larger chorus, you catch a faint edge of soap from the steward's hands. The plain kind that tells you water worked very recently and will be asked for again in the morning. The soap's honesty does the barn no harm. It sits beside the other notes and keeps them from forgetting their manners. You choose what to ignore and call it wisdom. Straw and ox you welcome. Tar you accept. Oil you acknowledge without making conversation. Wine you pretend not to notice, as if it were a person you've met in a better room. Sulfur you respect from a distance. Soap you thank. Bread in the corners auditions for virtue in silence. Your hands come back to your face for the green comfort of leaves. Breathing becomes the slow bell that keeps the night's time. Nothing in the list is eager to leave, but nothing insists on being the last word either. Before your eyes close, you give the room a sentence it can keep. This is a barn, not a parlor. It smells like labor, not ceremony. If the air carries the harbor and the hills together, that is the town's signature and not your problem. The mountain cools your cheek through the boards. The straw warms your ribs from below, and the mixture above you becomes a blanket you do not have to fold. Sleep, who understands the customs here, presses each scent with a quiet thumb, assigns it its place, and nods. The night goes on breathing, and so do you. Slower, simpler, with less ambition and more straw. The town does not sleep so much as change its voice. You lie still and let it introduce itself in small, deliberate sounds that find their way through boards and thatch and the pocket of blanket you have taught to stay. First come cartwheels, counting stones, iron rims, speaking a language of rim and rut, until the road smooths and the sentence ends without flourish. Hooves follow with the sober rhythm of an animal that knows the way home better than the man holding its rein. Leather creaks, a trace of harness perfume sneaks under the door, and a driver clears his throat as if offering public testimony on the night. The watchman takes his turn. He does not bang on doors. He converses with corners. His wooden rattle if you use the Dutch spools up and snaps, a little machine insisting on being heard. The sound is all angle and urgency, like a basket of dry sticks shaken at the dark. He pauses, listens for answers no one wishes him to receive, then steps and turns the crank again. There is a way he does it that says both all is well and don't make me come back, which is a tone you respect even from under a blanket. Farther off, another rattle replies, thinner, like a cousin repeating good advice. Somewhere toward town center, a bell practices its patience. It does not hurry the hour. It lays one note down, then rests, then lays another. There is no debate about whether you are meant to count. You count anyway and stop in the middle, because counting is a ladder and you prefer the straw. The bell does not mind. It speaks again to nobody in particular and to everyone within reach. Between the notes, the street decides whether to be quiet. The street decides yes and keeps it. From the harbor, rigging adds its little tapping to the list. Halyards lecturing masts in a private code you are not meant to solve. When the wind shifts, a timber complains with a long, well-bred groan that carries salt enough to season a thought. A loose board somewhere claps once and is ashamed of itself. Dogs debate the ethics of other dogs until one with authority chooses silence and the rest remember how to agree with leaders. A cat suggests a treaty and signs it in dust. A plain fact sits on the edge of your blanket and looks comfortable there. In 18th-century Cape Town, the night watch moves under company order, tasked to keep fires shy, mischief thin, and hours honest. Watchmen carry rattles to sound alarms or mark their rounds. Some carry staves polished by hands in weather. Some have a handbell for notices when morning considers arriving. Curfews breathe in and out with seasons and the temper of governors, but the rattle stays. You listen and hear policy made into wood. The barn keeps its own republic of noises, quieter and closer. Pigeons adjust their feathers in long, persuasive sentences, ending in soft periods. Mice make maps with feet not much larger than the seeds they prefer. The ox sighs as if remembering grass in detail, then forgets. Your blanket, in the habit of lifting its corner at the hint of a draft, submits to your shoe's authority. The door remarks thump, patient on the relationship between wood and wind, then resigns itself to being a door. You notice how the different sounds travel. Bells arrive in straight lines like sober men. Rattles come in angles. Cartwheels roll in waves that thin as they go. Voices drift like dandelion clocks, all seed and no stem. Rigging taps in short ladders. You arrange each along the rafters in your thought, so they do not crowd your pillow. Somewhere a late laugh tries itself on the air, and decides morning would be a better audience. The tavern learns manners without admitting it has done any such thing. Small recipes for hearing drift back from other beds you have known. If a rattle troubles you, roll a scrap of wool and tuck it lightly in your ear, not deep, just enough to teach the world diplomacy. If a bell will be counted, count slowly until your own breath falls into step, and then let the numbers wander away without you. If wheels choose the stones, remind your brain that wheels are merely men's feet arguing with circles. Arguments end. You turn your head, and the noise changes. Toward the door, the wind collects and makes the watchman's rattle sound busy. Toward the stall, the ox's breath remakes the cartwheels into a slow tide. Toward the wall, the bell grows warmer, as if it would be pleased to be your neighbor. You decide the bell can stay. If it promises to speak only when asked, it promises nothing, and does not need to. Your pillow, never fully trustworthy, accepts its responsibilities for the space of a dozen breaths, which is all you require at the moment. A fringe habit from the harbor creeps in, and sits at the foot of your bed, trying not to look like superstition. Sailors do not whistle on deck at night, not if they favor calm. Whistling up the wind, they say, is a thing you can do by accident, and no one wants more weather than is already providing advice. The idea sidles into town with boots and tar and ends up in doorways and lanes. Fewer lips, fewer gusts. You add it to the quiet, not because you believe it, but because your mouth is occupied with breathing slowly, which is almost the same creed. The bell speaks again once, as if to say it remembers you. You do not count. You watch the sound reach your corner, lie down, and listen to the straw. A horse stamps, a lantern frame ticks as it forgets heat. A hinge clears its throat. The watchman's rattle knits two streets together, and silence begins to own more of the map. The barn's roof writes a long sentence in thatch, and pauses in the middle for effect. Everything you can hear is an ordinary thing doing its proper work. You find this persuasive. Uncertainty never misses an evening when weather and memory attend. Historians still argue whether that bell you keep measuring, the one you want to call the Groot Kirk, marked hours through all the night in your century, or mainly told events and high moments. The town's timekeeping, a mixture of watch calls, tavern scents, and private clocks that kept advice to themselves. Diaries offer bells, records offer cost of rope and oil. The truth walks home by another lane and leaves you with probabilities. The doubt is gentle. It folds itself at the edge of your blanket and takes up no space you need. You become a small clerk of the night and file sounds where they belong. The watchman's rattle you file under assurance, the bell under measure, the cartwheels under transit, the rigging under weather, the door under reminder, the ox under company, the pigeons under background, your own breath under proof. When the drawer marked proof fills, you let the others grow dusty. Your eyes, which have been pretending interest in the dark, admit they are done with inventory. You do not ask the noises to stop. You simply let them keep walking until they step into a farther room where straw, roof, and wind have better manners. The bell has the last word it was going to have anyway. The rattle decides it has said enough, and gives the corner to the cat who says nothing. Hooves find home. Wheels forget stones. The harbor rethinks its tapping and replaces it with sleep. You lie still and discover that hearing less is not an achievement. It is only the night doing what it always intended. Somewhere, a hinge decides to dream of oil. Somewhere, a rat thinks better of the sack it wanted to climb. Somewhere, the watchman leans on his staff and enjoys 10 unargued breaths. You try the same and do not quite reach 10 before the numbers lose their hats and wander off without you. The barn continues, a quiet machine making morning. You let it work. You let the town do its rounds. You let sleep, plain and serviceable. Take the ledger from your hands and close it with the dignity of a book that knows it will be opened again. Your coat would rather be a coat than anything useful. You wrestle it into a pillow anyway, rolling sleeves into its belly, tucking the collar under like a sulky lip, and lacing the bundle with a shoelace so it remembers its duties. It sighs along the seam and tries to return to being a bad idea. You teach it the shape of your head with a firm hand and a stone slid underneath for principle. The stone does not argue. The coat learns. You rehearse the angle of your neck too high, and the night becomes a clerk. Too low, and dreams pour out of your ear. A narrower fold, 1 breath. A flatter fold, 2 breaths. Satisfied, you let weight move slowly from shoulder to shoulder until bones accept the compromise. The straw below and the thatch above approve nobody and tolerate everything. One plain fact stands at the foot of your bed like a sensible ant. Pillows are luxuries in many rooms at the Cape in this century. Blankets travel. Mattresses come when fortunes decide they like you. And coats do double duty because they are stubborn and already yours. Inns keep linen for guests of means. Barns keep straw for anyone with patience. You accept the democratic justice of straw. Out of other people's mouths come odd helps that cost little. A drover swore a thin braid round a bundle keeps it from wandering. You thread one and feel the bundle behave. A sailor set a puff of breath into the coat's shoulder, softens it like a lung. You breathe once and pretend you agree. Someone's aunt recommended a single hair cord tied around the bundle to keep thoughts together. You cannot spare cord for thoughts, but you nod to the idea so it does not feel lonely. Uncertainty pulls up a stool, as it enjoys doing. Historians still argue whether travelers in barns here tucked their own bedding into slipcovers, or if hosts kept rough-sacking to sheath straw for guests. Inventories list bolts of linen and hemp, but ledgers are often shy when it comes to such homely arrangements. The straw, unbothered by scholarship, supports whoever lies down first. You listen to the town breathing through your corner, while your neck decides whether to forgive you. A hinge explains itself to the wind. A pigeon shifts its complaint. Somewhere, a cork moves in a barrel and remembers grapes. You discover the fold that asks the fewest questions, and let your head sink until your cheek finds the coat's warm seam. It smells of road and smoke, and an afternoon you are glad to finish. You slip a pinch of crushed buchu into the loose mouth of the coat, a green, sharp thought between layers of cloth. The scent rises like a modest correction, turning the pillow from travel into hillside. If anyone asks, you will say it is science. If no one asks, it will still be hillside. Your breath steadies. The pillow does not become generous, but it becomes obedient, which is nearly the same thing at this hour. You slide the shoelace knot to the far side, so it does not stamp itself on your ear, and teach you the alphabet in reverse by morning. Then you give the bundle one last patient press, the kind you give to problems that are not anybody's fault. And the coat, surprised by kindness, decides to hold its shape long enough for sleep, to find you with fewer arguments to manage. Other travelers make beds of their own noises. A man across the aisle rearranges straw with the careful rhythm of someone who has done this in many barns. The sound is like thin rain practicing on a thatch before the real weather arrives. A drover coughs without insisting on being tragic. The cough finds the rafters and stays there to mind its manners. A groom mutters inventory to himself. Halter, curry, blanket, oats, as if naming things keeps them from escaping. You keep your body still and join the common quiet, which is not silence, but a treaty. Boots land heel to heel by blankets. Coats become pillows with varying levels of rebellion. Someone folds a hat into a thoughtful bowl to keep coins from wandering. Someone else keeps their coins in a boot, and the boot under a hand. A cat makes rounds and collects taxes in the currency of petting from those who cannot help themselves. You pay in admiration and are spared. A plain fact taps your shoulder and takes a seat. At this refreshment station of the Dutch East India Company, where fleets pause and roads braid farm to harbor, barns along the lanes swap solitude for company most nights. Drovers between outposts, sailors between ships, journeymen between chances, slaves and free people both on errands long and small, all of them carrying sleep the way they carry bread, as if it must be kept from crumbling. The company counts barrels, the night counts breaths. A small, practical, fringe tidbit travels well. If you must share a room of strangers, Set a spoon or a small knife on the floor by your left hand's reach, edge turned away, as a reminder not to startle if a foot strays near. It is not a weapon, it is a thought you can touch. You place your spoon where your fingers will find it, and feel the treaty grow thicker. You pass water and bread by the post when a neighbor's hand hovers, the way travelers do when the steward is away and the jug is a republic. Your portion tastes of cask and iron, theirs tastes of relief. A man thanks you in words you half know. Gratitude wears the same coat in any language, and fits fine. You let the thanks settle on the straw between you like a coin you do not need to pick up. Uncertainty, patient as ever, leans an elbow on the stall, and wonders aloud. Historians still argue whether sleeping arrangements in public outbuildings at the Cape followed strict separation rank and race squared into corners, or whether necessity blurred lines more often than the records will admit. Official paper keeps tidy rooms, but the night tends to put blankets where there is room for a blanket. In the dark, you feel company and do not inventory it. Your own quiet becomes a polite contribution. You turn only with slow permission from your palate. You cough into cloth. You fold loud thoughts in half until they take less space. In return, the room keeps your name to itself. The treaty holds. There is a kindness in hearing other people try to sleep. Their breathing proves that nothing else is required of the hour. Your breath falls into step, slower, a long low tide. Somewhere, a pigeon decides to approve. Somewhere, a rope decides to stop remembering the day. You grip the spoon once the thought, not the edge, and let your fingers forget it again. Company becomes background. Background becomes quiet. Quiet becomes sleep slowly, like straw settling after a long cart ride. Above you, pigeons hold their parliament with velvet throats and uncertain feet. They shuffle along a beam the way clerks shuffle along a ledger, adding nothing, but convinced of procedure. A coup begins, swells, corrects itself, and ends in a sound that thinks it was a question. Feathers hiss when somebody changes sides too suddenly. Dust lets go and thinks it is important for a moment, then gives up and settles on your blanket like a second, paler blanket. You shift your palate an inch to deny the most obvious drop line. Pigeons are generous with opinion. Your face does not need to be a member of the committee. You align your head between two soft thrones of straw, as if setting a telescope to miss a star. The rafters begin to draw a map you can accept. A plain fact perches nearby and cleans its beak on the world. Dovecotes and loft roosts are common companions of farms and barns in your century. Pigeons return loyally to home and leave loyalty generously below. So rafters grow accustomed to company, and people grow accustomed to wiping. In a town that smells of hay, tar, and wine, pigeon is simply another signature. Odd advice presents itself with a straight face. Fold your hat brim upward before sleeping, so that whatever falls tonight will prefer the brim's outside to the inside. A miller told you, and millers have graduate degrees in dust. You turn the brim up and make a note to thank someone you will never meet. Uncertainty clears its throat politely from the darker beam. Historians still argue whether formal dovecotes dotting Cape farms in this era were plentiful in town or mostly country fixtures. The record's fat with land grants and lean on pigeon habits. The barn does not disclose whether its birds are tenants of convenience or nobility of a nearby coat leasing airspace. You accept the birds as original citizens regardless of their paperwork. Their sounds become a slow metronome of domestic business. A 1-foot hop, a disagreement with a feather that was never truly at fault. A murmured syllable that could be approval if any bird had that much confidence in your arrangements. You let their grammar sit above your sleep like an umbrella made of cooing. When their small thunder happens, an entire beam spooked by a dream in a single bird, you remember to breathe and not take it personally. Birds have never met your plans. You rub a line of crushed buchu along the exposed edge of your blanket and discover that the green citrus bitter scent occupies your nose kindly enough to demote loft politics. You pull the blanket a little closer to your chin. The dust that landed on the cloth becomes a map of a tiny archipelago you will never visit. That is the correct number of islands. When the pigeons subside into the posture of sleep, heads tucked, shoulders raised, the miraculous disappearance of neck, you feel the barn quieten in sympathy. You grant them the right to wake before you do, and to consider the morning without consulting you. Your gratitude, like their dignity, is soft-footed. The rafters hold the night. You hold your corner. Gravity holds the rest. It is governance enough. The cat returns with professional opinions. It belongs to nobody who would confess, and to everybody who understands mice. It steps through straw the way a careful reader turns pages without bending the corners. The lamp of its eyes goes off and on as it inspects the Republic of Sacks. A whisker decides whether a gap is worth learning. The cat says nothing, and says it well. Mice, summoned by grain and habit, revise their plans in real time. You hear the very small arithmetic of their feet along the wall, and the corner of a feed bin, where a hole is a theory trying to become a practice. A sound like a single seed thinking too loudly gives them away. The cat, already present, makes the sound their problem. It is a government that works. A plain fact sits down beside the cat and enjoys the view. Cats are not pets here so much as staff, kept by households, workshops, and barns, for the simple reason that grain draws mice and mice draw trouble. A smug cat is a roof's insurance. At the Cape, where ships, granaries, and barns breathe together, whiskers do honest work and are paid in pride. A fringe method from someone's granary smiles at the edge of your blanket. Sprinkle a narrow line of flour a foot or two from your bedding. In the morning, you can read a night's traffic as if it were writing practice, and if you must move your pallet to miss the most popular road, you will know where not to be. You do not want to feed anybody, so you keep your flour, but you mark the wall with the edge of a straw so you remember where the knight preferred to travel. Uncertainty sits on the bin and kicks its heel idly. Historians still argue whether imported grain in these decades spent more nights under town roofs than in buildings outside the walls, and whether cats in civic spaces belong to named households or drifted among public buildings on first-name terms with stewards. The cat refuses to participate in the debate and accepts your admiration as evidence that it is correct in general. The cat's patrol makes a narrow pathway of assured silence. It steps, pauses, listens to an argument you cannot hear, then changes its mind without apology. A mouse tries the beam above. The beam relays the message to the cat. The message changes the mouse's mind. You permit yourself to feel protected by a creature that stands no higher than your ankle. Protection is sometimes that small. You fold your hands under your chin, reduce the portion of you available to chance, and let the room complete its own work. The cat finishes a sentence and disappears with the grammar of a thing that has never been truly found. You breathe carefully, so as not to encourage the straw to offer its opinion on rustling. You promise the mice nothing, and keep your promises exactly. When sleep settles again, it does so with the certainty of a ledger balanced to the last grain. The cat's rounds continue without asking your leave. Your pillow remembers its duties for another polite stretch. The mice discover humility. Justice, tonight, wears whiskers and leaves no note. Dark comes here like a practiced craft. With the steward's candle put to bed and the barn's mouth shut to embers, you meet a kind of black that does not negotiate. It is not the fogged, gentle dark of cloud on a window. It is the firm, useful absence you can lean against. Your hands, employed as eyes, learn the map. Blanket hem, coat seam, spoon at the left, shoes at the right, beam above your toes measured by a cautious reach that ends before a bruise begins. You rehearse the small economy of movement the knight prefers. If you must drink, 5 slow steps to the post. If you must turn, shoulders first, then hips. If you must think, count your breaths until the numbers lie down beside you, and refuse to get up. The barn owns the moonlight, and has chosen not to spend it here. That is its budget. A plain fact settles like a sensible rule across the rafters. Lamp oil, wick, and candles cost coin, and coin is for salt, bread, and obligations. More than that, flame and thatch are cousins who should never be invited to the same supper. Inns shelter flame with brass and rules. Barns trust night and the wind's good behavior. Darkness keeps the accounts tidy. Quirky advice from someone's grandmother walks in wearing practicality. Tie a loose knot in the end of your blanket before you sleep so your hand can find the edge without consulting your brain. The knot becomes a little island your fingers steer toward when drafts try diplomacy. You make the knot and discover it is easier to be calm when your hands agree to help. Uncertainty, in its respectful voice, notes from the door. Historians still argue whether formal curfews in your decade bit sharply enough to dim private lights after a certain hour. or whether watchmen simply discouraged public flame and left households to their habits. Laws exist, diaries improvise, and the truth, being a night creature, keeps itself very quiet. You are content to let the law and the diary argue without your help. You lie with your eyes open to darkness that does not change with eyelids. At first, keeping still feels like work. Then the dark takes the effort and tucks it somewhere you cannot reach. Your ears, newly promoted, report the door's agreement with its hinge. The ox's breath turning pages in a slow book. The minute commas of mice reconsidering their sentences. Your chest keeps time like a church clock without a bell. The knot in the blanket pleases your left hand on the way to sleep. It says, "Here is the border of warm. Here is the place where drafts must present papers. Here is the small kingdom you are allowed to rule tonight." Your right hand learns where the spoon lies and forgets until it needs to remember. Your face learns the distance to the pillow's seam and forgets even faster. Darkness, seeing you have learned your lessons, stops supervising and becomes background. You do not win against night. You cooperate. It is simpler. In that cooperation lives the relief you needed all day and could not afford. You move only enough to keep blood civil. Thought narrows to the width of your breath. The barn holds its shape. The world, having no more to say to you that requires a flame, allows you to be unnecessary for a while. This, too, is a rule. The night's smallest citizens file their petitions. A tickle at the ankle that might be straw imagines itself into an insect and asks for attention. You grant none, and the petitioner withdraws. Another inquiry at the wrist presses its case. You answer with the green, camphor sharp rub of crushed buchu leaves, a scent you learned in the hills that crowds out smaller ambitions. The skin listens to the leaf and chooses its ally. A plain fact sits down with physicianly dignity. Fleas and lice ride the century seams on blankets, in seams of coats, in the straw that changes when it can. And everybody who sleeps among company learns to manage more than to conquer. Sweet herbs are the poor person's breath of clean. Buchu here, wormwood there, pennyroyal where gardens tolerate it. Smoke does the rest when daytime allows. Night in barns does without smoke for reasons obvious to roofs. Odd counsel arrives in a low voice from someone you met near a wash line. Tuck a sliver of dried citrus peel into your collar and cuffs lemon, if you can get it. The orange if someone was generous, so your heat persuades the rind to speak, and little teeth decide to attend other meetings. You saved a small curl from a market day. You slide it into your shirt like a smuggled sun. It remembers summer, and your wrist stops making remarks. Uncertainty takes its careful seat and spreads a thin paper of doubt. Historians still argue whether local households at the Cape relied mostly on imported European herb habits for insect discouragement, or adopted koi and enslaved Asian remedies more than the surviving notes confess. Recipes live long, but they live in kitchens, and kitchens write rarely. Your own practice owes thanks to a woman who laughed at your city hands and taught you which hillside scents hold their ground. You keep your legs under the blanket and refuse to offer ankles to ambassadors. When a real bite presents its credentials, you press it with a fingernail's cool half moon and declare the matter settled. It protests briefly and then apologizes by leaving. You dust your calves with a pinch of ash from a day-old hearth dry. Fine. A miner's thought, and discover that ash draws a line tiny mouths dislike to cross. Ash goes where smoke cannot tonight and offends no thatch. Some travelers mutter about sprinkling salt. Others swear at whispers of vinegar on cloth. Someone even recommended a thread of blue tied around a wrist. So fleas respect the sea. You choose what costs least and smells least like a quarrel. Leaves and peel earn their keep. Ash minds the border. Blue thread, tonight, may rest. Your skin, mostly convinced, learns to ignore what remains. That is the larger part of comfort. Not perfect conditions, only a talent for treating ambition as weather. You let your hands cool inside the tent of your blanket and listen while the barn writes the next line of its quiet. A mouse decides to forgive you for existing. A pigeon decides to forgive the mouse. The ox forgives everyone without being asked. Sleep, invited by the small piece you have negotiated, enters like a clerk who has decided to approve the whole stack without reading every paper. Your wrists smell faintly of hillside. Your collar carries a market's memory. Your ankles have nothing left to say. You keep breathing as if that were the only job left, because it is. The jug sits by the middle post like a short, patient sentinel, shoulders wrapped in a damp cloth, to persuade dust to mind its business. You go to it with the careful feet of a person who appreciates not falling in the dark. Your fingers find the rim first cool, faintly tacky from a life in staves, and then the handle, smoothed by other hands that wanted the same thing you want now. The ladle lies upside down in a shallow wooden dish, as if it too needs a bed. You right it, rinse it with its own water, and listen to the small permission that sound gives the room. You do not drink from the ladle's lip. Customs are not complicated if you ask them politely. You tilt water into your cupped palm, then into your mouth, then again. It tastes traveled old oak and a thin line of iron, the ghost of work, a memory of grapes or vinegar, depending on who last owned the barrel before it decided to be a jug. Flat, sailors would call it, meaning the sea taught their tongues to expect impatience. For you, it is simply water that has remembered too many rooms. You swallow and feel your throat forgive the wind's opinions. A plain fact takes the ladle from your hand, only in the mind, and nods. In 18th century Cape Town, water comes down from Table Mountain in obedient streams, channeled along furrows and gutters to fountains and yards, while water carriers haul it in casks to households, bakeries, brewers, and ships that stop for more than wind. Fresh casks matter. Staves once flavored by wine or vinegar speak even when they are asked to be quiet, and tongues learn to translate. The harbor takes on water as a form of courtesy to long voyages. The town survives by it. You stand a moment and pour from ladle to palm again, this time from a little height, aerating the mouthful because somebody taught you that bubbles rescue tired water. The splash is a small party your hand hosts for your throat. You feel improved at once, which may be the water or the idea of bubbles, or both. You lay the ladle back in its dish and fold the damp cloth over the jug's mouth so the night cannot drop more guests inside. A fringed tidbit waits by the post with a charcoal grin. Slip a clean splinter of charred wood into a jug charcoal from last week's cooking fire, rinsed and scraped so it sweetens water, drinking odors, and lending back a steadier taste. The practice travels from hearth to ship and back again. Some bruise boot shoe and float a leaf for honesty. Tonight a small burnt twig sits at the bottom like a black fish and minds its duty. The water thanks it by being less argumentative. You practice the little etiquette of shared thirst, 2 ladles, not 3, unless nobody is watching. The last pour for rinsing the ladle, not the mouth. The cloth neatly replaced. Your hands drip a line on the floorboards that the wind finds and edits. You listen to the jug's round glug as it settles, and imagine the path that brought it here. A cooper setting hoops, a carter complaining cheerfully, a steward negotiating coin, and the post acquiring a stain that will outlive the rafters. Uncertainty straightens its papers and speaks softly, because midnight is not the time for large voices. Historians still argue whether outbuildings like this leaned mainly on town fountains and carriers for their jugs, or on private wells and yard cisterns behind the lime-washed walls. Records count planks and pence and say water, without explaining whose stream, whose cart, which pipe. You accept that the jug's biography is longer than the space on its label. You pour one more mouthful and hold it in your cheek, letting flat become good enough. The iron ghost might be from a hoop, the wine memory from a previous life, the faint smoke from the charcoal's sermon. You are content to have a throat that no longer feels like a road the wind paved. When you lower the ladle, a bubble answers from deep in the jug, as if it were thinking in its sleep. Advice with more confidence than evidence walks past in another traveler's voice. Drop a silver coin into the water to keep it honest. You have a coin, but you require it for bread, and honesty can be managed with charcoal and patience. Another voice says to stir with a green twig for a fresher thought on the tongue. You do not stir. You are already persuaded. Back under the blanket, the taste of cask and leaf climbs your breath and becomes almost pleasant, like a story told by someone who cannot help mentioning where they have been. Your hands cool again. Your mouth stops being a desert. The pillow exhibits a brief willingness to serve. The jug remains where it was, a round silence that other throats will visit before dawn. You add your thanks to the cloth with a careful fold. and leave no other mark. Sleep returns more easily when the body has been given a small, practical gift. The barn approves with a low timber creak. The ox offers a clean exhale. The door remembers not to insist. Your tongue, no longer preoccupied, forgets itself and lets breathing do the rest. The wind, deprived of a dry mouth to bully, edits the eaves instead. You close your eyes and carry a little taste of wood into the dark, which is not a luxury, but enough. Cold travels differently here. It does not rush. It accumulates, sifting down the wallboards, slipping across the floor in a low tide, then settling into your joints as if it had rented them for the night. Table Mountain holds the last light too long, then releases it all at once, and the air, feeling newly responsible, takes its duties seriously. You pull your blanket higher until only the patient bridge of your nose is employed in the weather. You learn the barn's climate with your skin. Warmth pools near the ox and drifts away in a lazy spiral. The door makes a small river of chill that explores your ankles. The seam where two planks disagree becomes a spring that never tires. You nudge your palate 3 inches toward the stall, adopting the ox's weather as your own. The animal shares heat with the indifference of a saint, and you are grateful with the eagerness of a mortal. One plain fact sits down politely at the edge of your blanket. The Cape's climate is Mediterranean dry summers. Wet winters and nights, even honest summer nights, can cool quickly under clear skies. In winter, the northwester brings rain that lingers in bones and rafters, and in summer, the southeaster scours the air so clean that heat cannot find purchase after sundown. Either way, evenings remember mountains more than fires. You accept that geography wins arguments you never began. You practice country arithmetic for warmth. Knees climb toward chest, elbows tuck. The blanket's knot you tied earlier becomes a handle for keeping drafts outside the treaty. You slip one socked foot under the other calf and discover an economy of heat unknown to the ambitious. Your coat pillow, for once cooperative, keeps your ear out of the wind's path and smells faintly of the day you survived. A fringe, portable comfort comes to mind from a Dutch kitchen far better lit than this barn. A brick warmed by the hearth, wrapped in cloth, and tucked at the feet kin to the little foot stoves, stuffies, that sit under skirts in churches and by winter windows. In a barn you settle for the kinder version of the idea, the brick warmed at dusk and allowed to cool to modesty before it comes near straw. Tonight you have no brick, only the memory of heat, and the patience to fake it with layered socks and good intentions. Your toes write a letter of complaint, then forget to send it. You breathe slower on purpose. Warmth respects slowness. The green edge of the boot shoe you rubbed earlier returns as a small, bright corner in the cold, like a square of sun saved in a pocket. You think of sleep caps and mittens, perfectly respectable nighttime clothing in houses with real beds and rules, and decide your hat will serve as both sense and fashion, pulled down to the eyebrows. It teaches the night to mind the line you have drawn. Uncertainty arrives with quiet manners, a shawl around its shoulders. Historians still argue whether public or semi-public barns at the Cape kept extra coverings to lend rough sacking, spare rugs, old horse blankets, or whether travelers were expected to carry their own warmth entirely. Ledgers count nails and rope with enthusiasm and grow shy around textiles that wander. Diaries mention cold without specifying whose blanket it was. Your blanket, tonight, is yours enough. You consider standing a moment to shake blood into your feet, then remember that getting up invites the cold to introduce itself to every surface. Instead, you flex each toe in turn as if taking roll, then press your heels together until heat thinks it has been given meaningful work. The ox murmurs agreement and edits a draft with one large exhale. You drift closer to its weather and pretend you did not. Another small trick that costs nothing. Exhale into the tent your blanket makes and leave the air there for the next breath, a private climate with manners. It fogs the inch before your lips, then clears with each slow tide. Your face learns to keep still. Your chest writes even lines. Your shoulders, previously skeptical, consent to lower themselves a finger's width, then another. The mountain, outside and enormous, shrugs. Cold slips off its stone like water and finds roofs that cannot argue. You offer it less to find. Breath by breath, you become narrower, until only what you intend remains uncovered. The rest belongs to the hour and can stay there. Sleep, which likes people who stop negotiating with physics, sits down beside you and begins to copy your handwriting. Your toes file a formal complaint. They have been good citizens all day, pushing you along cobbles that believed in themselves too strongly, waiting in shoes that negotiated badly with dust, and now the blanket, honest but opinionated, presses on them as if to improve their character. Scratch is its first language. You draw the hem up, your shoulders protest. You lower it, your toes petition for mercy with the eloquence of 10 small lawyers. The blanket is country cloth, woven for usefulness, not forgiveness. It remembers sheep before it remembers sleep. The lanolin ghost greets your nose like a relative who insists on hugging. Its surface is a geography of little thistles and blunt hills. You try stroking the nap all one way with the flat of your hand. It purrs like a cat that won't admit it has purred, then returns to being bristly in time to keep you honest. You fold the edge back on itself to make a smoother lip, and persuade that lip to rest upon your feet like a civil hat. You practice blanket arithmetic. If you be generous to shoulders, toes become exiles. If you honor toes, shoulders sulk. Solution: create a pocket. You lift the hem, tuck it under your feet, and make a neat fold that traps a small burrow of warmth where the town of your body meets the border of the night. Socks, already ambitions of wool, decide to cooperate. Heat begins to understand your intentions. A plain fact sits upright, tidy as a ledger line. At the 18th century Cape, rough woolen rugs and blankets duffel, baize, kersey, and their relations arrive by way of company trade and local purchase, while sheepskin karosses, worn by Khoi and settlers alike, serve as cloaks by day and coverings by night. Softness is a privilege, durability the rule. In public barns you meet what can be spared, serviceable cloth with more virtue than comfort. Knowing this does not soothe your toes, but it makes you polite to the blanket. The floor lends a hand. You rake a thin roll of straw into a bolster at your feet, a low ridge that lifts cloth off nail and bone. The pressure eases. Your toes, pleased to be under an awning instead of a roof, return to their better manners. To hold the fold, you run a shoelace under the bolster and over the blanket once, tying it in a lazy bow to one side, so knots don't sign their names on your ankles. You admire the contrivance for being almost clever and entirely free. A fringe. Traveler's tidbit tiptoes in from some roadside loft. Twist a hand's length of straw into a soft ring and set it over your toes under the blanket. It tenses the weight away from sore nails and keeps the cloth from catching. You make one straw breathing against straw and discover that small engineering can be as comforting as large philosophy. The ring sits there, proud and ridiculous, and works. You give your toes a short massage through the socks. Nothing heroic, just enough to teach them that they are seen. A whisper of tallow from a candle scrap warms under your palms and slicks the wool so it behaves. You use less than a roomer and keep it well away from straw. Sensible is a bigger safety than warm. The toes unclench by degrees. 5 students allowed to leave class early, then 5 more who pretend they weren't waiting at the door. Uncertainty coughs politely from the foot of the bed. Historians still argue whether public outbuildings issued coarse sacking or horse blankets to unknown sleepers as a matter of routine, or whether most travelers brought their own coverings, karosses, or cloaks, with washing and lending practices left to household habit. Ledgers name numbers, not naps, and diaries complain of cold without footnotes. You accept that tonight's blanket may have a longer memory than you do. You consider the respectable tradition of foot stoves and brick warmers again, then choose the barn-safe version. Friction, straw, patience, a slow rub between sock and sock writes heat without sparks. You keep your heels together until warmth thinks it has a job title. Your hat, pulled low, becomes a treaty with the air. Your shoulders accept their ration of cloth without filing new paperwork. The ox radiates steady charity from the stall. You face that way and borrow weather as if borrowing a book. It costs nothing and must be returned by morning. The ring of straw continues to tent the blanket above your toes, and the shoelace keeps ambition in its lane. Your feet discover that comfort can be engineered from fields and string. They apologize for earlier rhetoric and agree to breathe with the rest of you. Another odd kindness drifts through memory. Turn stockings inside out so the seam stops arguing with tender skin. You obey in the dark with the slow care of someone cracking a walnut in a library. The difference is unglamorous and immediate. You become a person with fewer enemies south of the ankle. Breath lengthens. Counting becomes a suggestion rather than a task. The blanket shown exactly how to lie, at last chooses to lie exactly so. Toes, granted the dignity of a small roof and a local climate, retire from politics. The barn accepts your edits to its night. You keep still, not as an achievement, but as a courtesy. And the body thanks you by remembering how to disappear into its own warmth. The big door has its own opinions and expresses them in hinge language. First a sigh, the long board easing against the jamb as the wind persuades it to remember who is larger. Then a thoughtful creak as iron tells wood a story about the day's weight. At intervals, the latch lifts a whisper, drops a click, and the whole assembly thumps gently, as if testing your patience for cracks. You do not mistake it for malice. Doors in this town are bilingual, speaking both timber and weather. You sit up on an elbow and listen to the hinge explain itself again. The sound has parts. A dry scrape where the pin sits in the gudgeon. A dull, round murmur where the strap flexes. A tap you cannot place until you find it the loose tongue of the hasp pecking at the staple with every breath of the Cape Doctor. You tighten the knot in the tether you ran earlier, but the wind has a talent for asking again. The door, a sturdy animal, leans into its halter and waits to be told a better idea. You give it one, a rag, damp from the jug, pressed between hasp and staple. The cloth swells, the pecking stops. A wisp of straw twisted into a short cord and tucked along the hinge pin. The scrape lowers itself to a respectful whisper. Your shoes, useful even in retirement, brace the bottom edge where drafts like to invite the hinge to speak louder. The door considers these edits and in time agrees to cooperate, the way a mule will if your argument includes patience. A plain fact arrives wearing lime wash and a respectable gable. At the 18th century Cape, door leaves for barns and byres are thick planks hung on broad, wrought iron strap hinges blacksmith work, both imported by company ships and forged locally, while houses in the Cape Dutch style boast heavy timber doors under white, flared gables, their ironwork blunt and serviceable. Hardware here lives long and tells its descendants how to behave. Wind simply insists they keep practicing. Quirky knowledge, born of long evenings and short tempers, steps in with clean hands. Rub a thumb of tallow or a breath of soap along the hinges' meeting places, and iron will remember smoothness. Wedge a slice of cork from a friendly bottle behind a latch, and the clatter falls asleep. Tie a narrow hush strap of rawhide from handle to nail, and the door, when it sighs into leather. Instead of announcing itself to the entire barn, you do the quiet version soap from your wash rag worked thin along the pin, cork trimmed with your knife and seated where metal argued. The improvements are modest and immediate. The wind, finding less to move, becomes philosophical. It tests the gap, writes a soft line along the sill, and goes away to advise the eaves. The door, chastened and grateful in its wooden way, settles into the posture of a guardian rather than a herald. You sit back and let your shoulder remember the blanket. The hinge, reduced to a character actor, hums a low vowel that the straw translates into nothing worth attention. Uncertainty draws up a stool beside the toolbox in your mind and keeps its voice down. Historians still argue whether outbuildings within town bounds relied mostly on imported ironwork from the Netherlands or increasingly on locally forged hinges and latches by the century's middle. Inventories list Iser work by weight, not by maker, and receipts travel less faithfully than the wind. As for sliding barn doors rare in these parts, occasional, the paper does not say. The hinges outnumber the guesses. The night is not offended by ignorance, provided the latch behaves. You run a finger along the strap's edge, feeling the tiny burrs left by a file a long time ago. Someone's hammer married this hinge to someone's door before you learned the road. And here you are, two strangers borrowing the same noise. Your breath slows under the cap's brim. The ox, having no stake in doors, contributes a deep permission that rearranges the room's authority. You tuck the blanket's knot into your palm, so your hand knows where warm starts. The hinge gives one last polite remark as the wind turns the barn into a different instrument. The rafters now, the thatch, the small harp of hanging rope, and then it is quiet enough that you can hear dust making decisions in the slant you will see as sunlight later. Your pillow tries to defect. You tighten its shoelace once, and it remembers its oath. The cork you trimmed holds its station with the loyalty of an old sailor. The soap, already ordinary again, continues to do heroic work without insisting on a medal. You think of other doors you have trained. The inn back in Stellenbosch that needed a folded scrap of linen under its meeting rail. The farmhouse near the Paardeberg where a nail bent just so taught a latch humility. The ship's locker that kept time with a squeak until somebody overturned a drop of oil that smelled of whales and patience. Doors are like people, some respond to reason, some to small food, some to being listened to. The hinge's voice has dropped to a rumor now, and rumors do not wake you. You lie down and let your weight smooth the bed you made earlier. The door, convinced, stands guard without commentary. The wind, bored, goes to fidget with rigging, where bells will not mind. You own, for the length of several slow breaths, a corner of the world in which nothing larger than a hinge intends to speak. That is plenty. Your eyes close. The rag softens in the hasp. The cork keeps its vow. The strap remembers the warmth of soap, and the knot of your blanket remembers your hand. Even the doctor, outside, writes a prescription for sleep and hangs it on the eaves. You accept it without reading the Latin. The hour arrives one measured note at a time. You lie on your side and let the barn make every stroke rounder, wood catching the sound and handing it back with softened corners. Somewhere, a bell takes breath one, then another, pausing wide enough that your mind steps between them and sets out chairs. You do not plan to count, and then you are counting, because nothing else tonight asks to be tall. Between strokes the night is a long hallway. Your breath walks it slow, even, unambitious. The ox edits the silence with a warm paragraph of nose. Wind folds itself at the door and practices courtesy. You keep the blanket's knot in your left hand the way a child keeps a ribbon in a crowd, and let seconds pass like neighbors in no hurry to speak. A plain fact stands up in sober clothes. In 18th century Cape Town, time is heard more than seen. Church bells, watchman's calls, and ship routines in the roadstead keep most people's hours. Long case clocks and pocket watches exist, but they live mostly in rooms that can afford them. The street takes cues from metal on wood and trained voices. Tonight you are simply a listener among listeners. You try the bell's arithmetic without forcing it. Stroke, breath, pause. Stroke, breath, pause. If a number wishes to name itself, it will. If not, the strokes are only stitches holding the dark together. From the harbor, a smaller code arrives, rigging ticking against masts. Ships keep half hours with their own pattern of bells, 8 to a watch, but so far off that it becomes weather rather than instruction. A fringe tidbit, friendly as rumor. Some households hang a little sandglass near a night candle, turning it to remind themselves to trim the wick or whisper a prayer. The hour written in falling grains keeps beds from talking to flame. You picture the neat waste of glass, the sand-writing hush on the table. In a barn, night uses cheaper tools, breath, straw, and a public bell. The strokes continue, firm but not proud. You match them until you don't, because sleep moves the chairs you set out, and the count sits where it pleases. Once you forget the number on purpose to see if forgetting changes anything, it does not. The bell remains sure of itself. Your bones, offered a choice between arithmetic and gravity, choose gravity. Uncertainty takes its usual bench and speaks under its breath. Historians still argue whether the town's main church kept a true hour, striking clock through your decade, or struck mostly for services and alarms, with watchmen filling the spaces between. References are plentiful but imprecise, drifting with repair, purse, and governor. Diaries remember bells. Ledgers remember the cost of rope. You adjust your contract with the clock. If it means to tell you something, it will come find you. Meanwhile, you will be a warm shape in straw in a place that smells of tar, hay, and the faint arrogance of wine long gone. Your jaw unclenches. The blanket's knot becomes not a handle but the memory of one. The ox turns a page in its slow book and returns to the sentence it was on. Another clock arrives the barns. Pigeons shift into their colder posture. Mice choose shorter journeys. The wind stops explaining and begins supervising. These are not minutes, only changes in flavor. A tall clock in the lane could not own any of it. Barn time prefers broad strokes. Because your mind is polite, it shows you clocks you have met. A brass-faced long case in Constantia that spoke like a well-fed uncle. A ship's bell that made midnight sound like a plank being forgiven. A tavern timepiece, needing its pendulum argued into honesty each Monday. Tonight you are grandly without them, and nothing breaks. Another small custom steps in barefoot. If you cannot leave a count alone, count backward from whatever number the bell just offered. Allow mistakes, and when the floor of numbers gives way, do not fix it. Fall through, your breath will be waiting. You try it once, and promptly misplace a 7. It is a relief to be careless without consequence. The bell rests. The silence after is full of not bell straw resting, rope not creaking, door not thumping, ox not moving, you not counting. A watchman's rattle, far off, closes a paragraph you did not know you were writing. You lay the paragraph by your shoes and let it be. Plain fact again, smaller but worth keeping. Mornings here begin before clocks think they should. Bakers, grooms, water carriers, milkers work wakes first. Bells claim credit later. You smile into the blanket at an hour that has to run to catch people. By the time the next strokes wander in, perhaps they do, perhaps they don't. You are busy with the only appointment you have, being warm and still. If the clock has opinions, it can write them in air for someone else to read. Your eyes prefer closed, your mouth softens, your chest continues its hired work. Sleep, which respects schedules only when they are patient, arrives without a bell and begins owning your minutes quietly. The tavern's voice arrives late and thin, as if it has walked most of the way home without shoes. From your corner you hear the leftovers of merriment, brushed into the street, one glass speaking to another. A chair set down with more affection than accuracy. A laugh that remembers itself halfway through and lowers its volume for shudders. Wind collects these bits, smooths their edges, and carries them under the door like crumbs on a plate someone means to wash in the morning. A man sings 2 lines of a song that knows more lines than he does. The tune staggers, catches a railing, and takes a seat. Hooves clop, pause, clop again. A harness jingles with a sleepy conscience. Someone debates the cobbles with shoes that have opinions about direction. Then quiet moves in with its lamp turned low. You can feel the moment, when the street remembers that night is a room and not a road. One plain fact, simple as a chalk mark, takes its place on the beam. In 18th century Cape Town, wine and brandy are licensed trades. Tappers keep slates, measure out cups, and answer to company ordinances about hours and order. Beer arrives where it can, and a rack sometimes, while the town minds its thirst with rules as well as with songs. Watchmen pass these doors with rattles, not to join the singing, but to remind it that the night is rented, not owned. The echo that remains is furniture and breath. Benches shuffle inside as hands tip them onto tables for sweeping. A bolt slides with the dignity of a final word. Somebody's broom writes long, quiet lines on a plank floor. A mug finds the shelf it belongs to and is content. A cat pauses in a doorway and approves of the new silence with a blink. A fringe, homely tidbit crosses from taproom to lane. When coins run short, some keepers mark a guest's slate with a notch or a tiny drawing a pipe, a jug, a star, each sign standing for a measure owed. The slate is wiped at week's end when hands are paid, and promises become arithmetic. You imagine the chalk, dampened with wine, making a careful circle that means one more, to be found again on Friday. You lie back and let the room subtract voices one by one. The last laugh thins to a cough, and then to a door thoughtfully closed. Somewhere, a fiddler raps his instrument and thanks it for doing more than it was paid for. Boots climb stairs where boards remember other evenings. The wind, relieved of applause, returns to its hinge studies. Your pillow behaves for a little while. Uncertainty sits on the sill and keeps its tone moderate. Historians still argue how strictly drinking hours were enforced in your decade. Placards set limits, fines slap knuckles, but diaries suggest many a closing time arrived when the watchman's circle reached a street, and not when a bell said so. Enforcement wandered with seasons, governors, and the patience of neighbors. The paper speaks clearly. The footsteps speak softly. You believe both, because the night teaches compromise. You picture the small world inside the tavern, pewter winking like tame moonlight, a candle snuffed with wet fingers, a landlord counting the day into a wooden. Till then, let the picture fold itself and drift away with the smoke. Your bed prefers fewer images and more weight. You give it both by thinking of nothing at all, and becoming heavier the way dough becomes bread by waiting. The barn listens too. It owns the next street over and the field past that, and prefers both to speak in nouns straw, beam, ox, rather than in verbs like shout or knock. You align yourself with those nouns and discover that your breath has learned the barn's vowel, longer and rounder each time. The ox turns a page. A pigeon admits it has nothing to add. Even the door hesitates before the next thump, as if it is reading the room and dressing more quietly. Another small custom floats up from kitchens that close earlier than taverns. When the last bowl is dried, a house sets a spoon crosswise on the shelf to tell the first waker that everything sleeps. Turned lengthwise, it means begin again. You imagine a line of crosswise spoons all over town and feel the signal travel into your fingers. You rest your own spoon where your hand will find it and let it mean enough for now. The echoes are finished with you. They wander to roofs and make nests of memory. If a shout rises, it is far enough away to be a story. If a laugh tries the air, it is already promised to whisper. Street and barn for once are in agreement. You keep your face warm behind the little tent of blanket, and the night gives back nothing that needs an answer. One more honest minute passes without you measuring it. The tavern's breath slows. The lane remembers itself. The watchman's rattle decides not to demonstrate. You close your eyes because there is no reason not to. Sleep, liking rooms with fewer verbs, comes to sit beside the nouns you chose, and you do not disturb it. At some hour when numbers forget themselves, the barn discovers a kindness it has been hiding all night. Warmth rises from the stalls, the way bread breathes when it comes out of an oven low, steady, a domestic sermon with no flourishes. It threads the straw and lifts the edge of your blanket not to steal it, but to check that you are still there. You slide an inch toward the partition and feel the difference climb your shins and make its case to your knees. The air is barn truthful animal. Hey, a hint of yesterday's rain filtered through hide, and somehow the truth is easier to forgive when it is warm. You learn the geography of comfort by touch. Cooler along the door, temperate where the boards have opinions, and then near the ox, that pocket of agreeable weather that belongs to animals and patience. Your hands find the beam. Your shoulder finds the polite bend you arranged earlier, and the blanket forgets its talent for being scratched first and becomes weight instead. You let your toes sit under the small tent you engineered and allow the rest of you to bask like a lizard that has chosen humility over rock. A plain fact sits down beside your pallet and speaks without theatrics. In this century, fresh dung and straw make heat enough that gardeners in many places build hotbeds, laying seed frames over piles that smolder gently to force early greens, while here in Cape Town the company's garden grows vegetables and fruit for ships that stop thirsty and impatient. Heat from animals and heaps is ordinary technology, long before stoves learned to be clever. You have borrowed the stable version, the kind that comes through planks and asks nothing in return. You indulge in small, harmless rituals that make a room friendlier. A single clove, saved from a sailor's market, hides in your kerchief. You breathe through the cloth, and the stable remakes itself into a cupboard where spices once waited their turn. The effect is not miracle, merely perspective, which is all you wanted. You keep the clove for later and let the honest air have the rest of its say. Uncertainty pulls up its little stool and keeps its voice even. Historians still argue whether town barns at the Cape, in your decades, engineered vents, manure pits, or special brickwork to capture and tame stable heat, or whether most warmth was simply the generous accident of bodies, boards, and thatch. Plans are thin, diaries thinner, and builders rarely wrote love letters to floors. You accept that your comfort rests on methods that did not file a report. The ox exhales and edits a draft near your ear. The edit is all in favor of sleep. You lie on your side and feel how the warmer air licks along the blanket's hem and creeps under like a respectful dog. Straw pricks where it must and resigns where it can. Your coat pillow, tempted to be difficult as always, seems to discover that it too enjoys a stall's climate and offers your neck a truce. You take it. You remember other places where warmth was borrowed, ship bunks that stole it from nearby men, kitchens that radiated it through stone, karosses spread over knees that manufactured it from breath, and decide the stable's version is the least proud of them all. It does not advertise. It simply persists. A groom turns in his own corner, and the air moves a little, then resettles the way. Flour resettles in a bin after a scoop. Another portable tidbit from road people rises with the steam of memory. If a night runs too sharp, sit your feet still socked on your folded cloak and trap the air that your legs have already paid for. Warm does not need to be made, only kept from escaping. You try it, and discover it is merely a more dignified version of what you were doing anyway. Dignity is helpful at midnight. You choose what to notice, and let the rest dim. Warmth, yes. Smell, only to the degree that it proves the warmth's honesty. The cat's professional silence, certainly. The pigeon's heavy quiet, also yes. The door's occasional thesis on weather, not just now. If a mouse writes its name in the flour someone else spilled, you are content to be illiterate. You grant the hour a license to be ordinary, and it uses the license modestly. The clove in your kerchief retires. Your wrists remember the green of earlier leaves. Your mouth keeps the taste of wood from the jug. Your chest finds the long vowel of sleep and repeats it until the word stops meaning anything at all. You press the blanket's knot once to prove it is where you left it. It is. The stall breathes again, and the boards pass the breath along, and you accept the gift without an oath or a plan. Plain truth, last and soft. Animal heat is humble, but it is faithful. You do not deserve it more than anyone else who has used this corner. You are merely the next person to borrow it. The barn holds your weight as if it has been practicing for you. The night holds its temperature where you have found it. Your eyelids hold closed. Somewhere outside, the mountain forgets your name, which is appropriate. Inside, the stable remembers only warmth, and that is all you require. Chaff is ambitious in ways you are not. It discovers elbows you forgot you owned, calves you believed were loyal, a tender square of skin below the shoulder that only remembers being tender once it has been reminded. Each prickle is a diplomat sent to negotiate terms you did not propose. You roll a breath to the left, and the deputation follows. You roll a breath to the right, and it files new papers. You become a cartographer of small irritations. You answer not with fury, but with housekeeping. Your palm, slightly dampened at the jug, smooths the straw in long strokes so spear points lie down and act like citizens. You pluck the worst offenders' barbed grass heads with heroic ideas and exile them to the floor's politics. A narrow belt of shorter stalks set crosswise under your ribs becomes a friendly border. Another, thinner still, along your hips ridge edits a complaint into a footnote. The blanket stops rehearsing friction and begins to practice weight. A plain fact ties its apron and helps. In this century, most bodies at the Cape wear linen next to the skin shirts and shifts washed as often as water, soap, and schedule allow while wool sits above to argue with weather. Coarse cloth from company trade and local looms is ordinary, and chafing is a conversation many people know by first name. Barn straw does not hate linen. It simply likes to be asked to behave with a firm hand. You test the ordinary trick of turning fabric so seams lie where bones are less quarrelsome. Shirt pulled an inch higher at the collarbone, cuffs unbuttoned to stop bites at the wrist. The blanket's hem folded over to present a calmer edge to your ankles. Under your toes, the little straw ring you plaited earlier continues to hold a roofline that keeps cloth from thinking it is a hat for nails. You press the blanket's knot into your palm until your hand remembers warm more than itch. A fringed tidbit wanders in from some hayloft where an old groom taught it to a boy. Set a shallow palmful of water on the straw and sweep it flat with your hand, not enough to wet, only to quiet dust and pin feathers so the top layer mats and stops arguing. You do as taught, a wide, slow brush. The chaff settles as if surprised to have been treated like a floor. Your breath lengthens into that new quiet. Still, a few bright needles insist on a say. You persuade them one by one with the back of a fingernail press. Smooth, forget. Where a burr learns your shoulder by heart. You lift the blanket, twist 3 stalks into a soft comma, and lay it as a pad no larger than a coin. It is an absurdly small kindness with large results. You congratulate yourself with no witnesses. Uncertainty sets its notebook on the beam. Historians still argue whether pallets in Cape barns like this were mostly straw from wheat and oats cut inland, reed from wetlands bundled after harvest, or restio and finbo sweeps pressed into service when seasons turned ungenerous. Invoices speak in bales and weights more often than plant names, and diaries name straw, as if the word needs no botany. You lie on the part that does not prickle, and let scholars quarrel with taxonomy. The ox replaces a paragraph of air with a warmer one, and your shoulder forgives almost everything. Your shirt decides to be a flag of truce rather than a field of battle. You tuck the hem under itself at the hip to blunt a seam's enthusiasm. A single seed head still clings to your sleeve. You flick it into exile, listen to it land, and feel the satisfaction of small justice done neatly. You remember other people's remedies and choose the gentlest. A whisper of clean soap rubbed thin on the inside of a cuff to teach cloth how to slide. A threadbare kerchief spread under a cheekbone to turn bristle into civility. A flat pebble in the palm, not for pressure, only to occupy a hand that would otherwise go hunting for itches and invent them when supply runs short. The pebble does nothing, and in doing nothing, succeeds. Another plain truth that helps. Comfort is rarely the removal of every complaint. It is the promotion of warmth to first place, of weight to second, of smell to a quiet third, and the demotion of prickle to the bottom of the ledger where the steward will not read too closely. You pursue that ledger with patience rather than ink. Each breath becomes a stroke through an item you no longer need to consider. Your skin, bored with being consulted, stops translating every whisper of straw into a message for the council of nerves. The chaff continues to exist elsewhere, which is the correct number of places for it to exist. You keep your knees barely touching a conspirator's posture that shares heat and discourages the blanket from sudden ideas. When your shoulder wants a new angle, you offer it 2 finger widths of rotation and no more. The prickle bureaucracy, surprised by limits, loses momentum. You think briefly about the field that made this bedding. A wind flatter than the one tonight. A blade, a rake, a cart, a fork, a loft, a scatter. Chaff was once the part that had to be separated so bread could learn its lesson. Now it is the part you negotiate with, so sleep can learn its own. You do not need the history to be profound. You only need it to end in less itch. When the last loud spot goes quiet, the burr moved, the seam tamed, the straw matted the rest of your body, remembers its better job. Breath returns to the long vowel. The blanket weights your shins like a sentence that intends sense and achieves it. The hand with the pebble warms and forgets its prop. And you, pardoned by your own cleverness, go back to belonging to the warm place near the stall where the barn, having argued enough for one night, decides to approve of you after all. The morning begins with a throat clearing. Not yours, the rooster's. His opinion arrives before the sky has chosen a color. A clean, brass-edged syllable that steps over the door and puts its foot softly on your shoulder. He tries again from somewhere behind the byre, deciding the first announcement lacked ceremony. Between the calls, quiet thickens as if sound is dough, and the rooster needs it. You lie still and feel the barn change hands from night to morning without asking for a receipt. Then come feet, 1 pair first. Small and quick the boy who belongs to brooms and buckets. He knows the floor by heart, and the straw listens for him. He slides the big door's bar in its cradle with a politeness you recognize from his teacher, pauses to let the wind sniff the gap, and steps inside with a weather report in his hair. A second set of feet follows, slower, a groom with a back that remembers yesterday's harness. The ox answers both with a warm paragraph, and the stable's air rises a degree, the way a kettle remembers what it is for. You stay mostly under the blanket and watch with your ears. A brush wakes in its corner, bristles humming in the boy's hand. A bucket learns the path to the pump and back. Leather, stiff with sleep, sighs when a strap is drawn and laid flat. The floorboard's sensible citizens hand each footfall to the next, and the sound travels around your palate like calm water around a stone. You take up less space and become the part of the room that is easy to step around. One plain fact stands by the post and knocks once before speaking. In 18th century Cape Town, work wakes before daylight grooms and milkers in byres, bakers at their ovens, water carriers at the pumps, watchmen finishing rounds while the first church bell thinks about stretching. The refreshment station earns its name in the dark, so that ships and households meet the sun with bread, milk, fodder, and water polite enough to be useful. The rooster is not the boss. He is only the herald who enjoys his job. A fringe tidbit, fond of kitchens and yards, pads in on bare feet. Some people swear that if the first sound you hear is a rooster, you will have a day that obeys itself. If it is a cartwheel, expect errands. If it is a bell, expect company. And if it is a broom, expect calm. You decide that your broom-sung morning promises calm with errands in the margins. Your pillow, suddenly cooperative, agrees to let you listen longer. The boy pours a measured scrape of grain, and the small republic of pigeons above you remembers that economy is a language they speak. Feathers whisper along the beam. Feet patter like rain nobody paid for. The rafters accept the commotion, the way a ledger accepts arithmetic. Somewhere in the lane, a cart tests its harness with a single clink, and then postpones opinion. The wind, finding the door uninteresting, decides to iron the thatch instead. Uncertainty, as punctual as dawn but softer, leans against the stall and keeps its voice low. Historians still argue how formal the hour calls of the town watch were in your decade. Whether each round named the time with habit and rhyme, or whether some nights the rattle alone sufficed, and the hour lived mostly in private clocks and roosters. Records mention rounds and fines more readily than the exact words that walk the streets. You accept that your morning belongs to footsteps and a bird with ambition, whatever the watch may be reciting 2 lanes over. The groom coughs the cough of a man who is friendlier with hay than with doctors. Then begins the day's first conversation with a curry comb. The sound is steady as a hymn sung in mittens. Hooves shuffle and agree to lift. A brush finds a rhythm and keeps it. You feel the stall heat lean over your ankles like a blessing that has learned to be practical. The straw under your ribs decides to stop arguing for a while. Your hands find the blanket's knot and decide there is no use for it just now. The rooster tries a third time and gets an answer from another yard farther off, rounder, as if that bird has opinions about echo. Between them, the town becomes a map of dawn stitched in thread you cannot see. Somewhere, a door latch offers a single dignified note. Somewhere, a kettle accepts its first breath. If you could watch the streets, you would see the trail of swept thresholds, like a line of modest flags. You keep breathing in the long measure you have learned here. There is no hurry in it. The day is already begun by other hands. A small courtesy suggests itself. You gather the loose straw at your edges into a neat lip, so boots won't pull it into the passage. Your shoes, set heel to heel, are pointed toward the idea of standing but do not insist. The spoon by your left hand lies crosswise to mean not yet, and you let it speak for you. Another homespun custom crosses your mind and smiles without proof. Turn your pillow once at the first rooster and again at the second, and you will wake at the right time without anyone calling your name. You turn the coat bundle, half for luck and half to cool the seam under your cheek. It smells of clean leaves and something like patience. The boy's bucket sloshes on the return. The groom's brush writes the last line of its paragraph. A pigeon approves because pigeons approve of anything that looks like breakfast. The morning has begun without asking your permission, which is the best way for morning to begin. You direct your attention to the inside of your eyelids, where it is still not quite light, and let other feet do the work of declaring the day. Chores arrive like a soft drumbeat and then organize themselves into a march. The boy returns with the broom riding his shoulder like a tame standard, sets it down bristles first, and begins with the long, patient strokes of someone who has been taught not to teach dust to fly. He draws the straw into tidy windrows, pauses to heave them into a bin, and sweeps again, the brush whispering a steady SSS across the boards. Behind him, the groom speaks hoarse in metal and leather. A buckle answered, a strap smoothed, the curry comb breathing in small, even circles against a hide that warms the room more than fire is allowed to. You keep still the way a stone keeps still in a stream. Your blanket's edge is tucked not under your hand, shoes heel to heel, and you are careful not to volunteer elbows into traffic. The boy, seeing your corner, skims his strokes wide, then flicks the broom's tip to gather chaff that thought itself sovereign. He does not step on your straw ring. You do not breathe too loudly on his rhythm. It is a treaty concluded without signatures. The stable sounds become a schedule you can hear. Grain measures into a bucket with a scrape you could count if counting were wanted. Water answers the pail with a muted glug, the pump not yet interested in theatrics. The curry comb writes its circles. The brush edits them. A hoof lifts, hangs, settles. Even the door trained last night with rag and soap and a cork you cut to size remembers how to behave in a room that is holding a morning together. One plain fact takes off its hat and speaks. At the 18th century Cape, regulations and habit make brooms busy company, placats fine people who fail to keep stopes and street fronts clean. Dung must not linger. Yards are to be swept. Byres mucked out. Middens kept to their places. The refreshment station's order is partly a matter of buckets, partly of law, and partly of people who wake early enough that the day arrives to find its floor already polite. What you hear is compliance turned into craft. A fringe tidbit rides the broom's handle like a small superstition. Wet the bristles with a dip of clean water or a pinch of damp sand crushed through the brush before sweeping, and dust will stay loyal to the floor instead of campaigning for the air. The boy practices exactly that. He lays his palm across the dampened bristle, face between passes, checks the drag and resumes. When he reaches the threshold, he sprinkles a little more sand, only a whisper, and the broom thanks him by moving like a creature that understands purpose. You can smell the order he leaves behind. Straw demoted from prickle to padding, leather woken by hand, heat, wood warmed by effort, a faint edge of soap that says yesterday ended as it should. Your corner benefits without having lifted a finger. You give the benefit back by smoothing your blanket's lip and dragging any stray stalks into his windrow with 2 quiet strokes of your palm. The groom has his own treaty with the morning. Tack comes down, is rubbed with a breath of oil, and goes back up in pairs that remember each other, reins with reins, girths with girths. He speaks to the ox as if both of them are older than the boy's broom. When a buckle refuses to learn manners, he warms it in his hands until it admits its fault. Hooves present themselves. The pick converses. The stall gives up last night's argument into the waiting barrow, which grows a smell that gardens understand. Uncertainty keeps its voice low beside the feed bin. Historians still argue how crews like this were composed on any given morning. Free burghers, lads on hire, enslaved men and women moving under orders, hoy workers bound by contract. Ledgers list names and payments unevenly, and diaries mention help where the law writes in categories. What reaches your ear is not a roster but competence, and it rearranges the air the same way regardless of who signed what book. The boy makes a brief inspection of your Republic water jug, capped, ladle nested, windrows gone, and nudges a stray burr with his toe, so it will not campaign again. He has learned the barn's grammar, that corners hold their peace if invited, that doors prefer kindness over force, that a broom should not think itself a drum. He scuffs the last of the sand into the threshold and leans the brush bristles up so they keep their shape for the next round. You hear the outside lend a hand. Somewhere in the yard, a barrow's wheel writes one careful circle. The pump takes longer breaths. A set of wooden rakes leans itself against a wall and pretends it has stood there forever. The groom's bucket moves. The ox declares breakfast agreeable. The boy returns with a small shovel and empties manners into the midden that will be carted away when the lane is ready to ignore the smell. You keep your eyes mostly closed and let the room nudge you toward day without pushing. The treaty holds. You take less space. They move around you as if you were part of the furniture that behaves. The barn grows cleaner with each SS of the broom. You rehearse your rising without doing it. Fold blanket, brush straw, tie shoelace, thank hinge, become person. Not yet. The morning is still busy judging itself ready. Another little custom floats past, broom-sized and cheerful. Sweep toward the door in long, straight lanes, and the day will come in like a well-behaved guest. Sweep in circles, and you invite argument. The boy is a lanesman. He finishes with a last exact stripe and a small tap of the broom's ferrule on the jamb, meaning done. He does not say the word. The barn says it for him. You breathe once deeper and discover the room has changed temperature without moving its walls. Work does that raises the degrees no one measures. The boy's feet fade toward the pump. The groom's brush loses interest in argument. The broom stands at attention near the door, drying its bristles into good posture. You remain a small, warm hill of blanket and patience in a barn that is now prepared for light. Somewhere to your right, where chores keep their voices low, a kettle begins to breathe. Not boil breathe. A thin, even sound like a cat purring through tin. The lid lifting a finger's width when the puff grows confident, settling when it thinks better of pride. The smell scribes a path under the door seam. Dark, toasted, a little bitter. The kind that teaches a morning to stand up. You lie still and let it find you. Steam carrying warmth across the floor in a ribbon you do not need to own to enjoy. Next comes porridge, the other kind of weather. You can hear it thicken in its pot, a soft plop-plop as oats or meal. Remember the shape of hunger, and answer it. A wooden spoon keeps time with the boy's broom, circle upon circle. The scrape kind and regular so the bottom will not decide to be difficult. A pinch of salt makes itself known in the nose, not as taste yet, just as advice. The stall breathes approval and gives the pot its own, larger steam. You imagine the little cookery, out back or to one side, no flame in the barn, not with straw thinking its thoughts where a three-legged pot squats over coals that have nothing left to prove, and a tin kettle rides a trivet with the patience of a saint. Hands you did not see last night have arranged this. Someone split kindling. Someone coaxed yesterday's ash into today's ember. Someone turned water into the kind of sound you can smell. The room borrows comfort through timber as if heat were a polite visitor allowed to pass quietly through walls. One plain fact takes a seat near the post and speaks without drama. In 18th-century Cape Town, coffee and tea arrive with Dutch East India Company ships from the east, and simple breakfasts, porridge from oats, barley, or maize meal, a scrap of bread, a cup of something hot begin days for free burgers, servants and enslaved people alike. The exact mixture depending on purse and provision. The refreshment station feeds ships by rule. It feeds mornings by habit. You are listening to habit do what rules cannot. Be kind. Small road wisdom approaches with its hat in its hand. To settle grounds in boiled coffee, crack a clean eggshell and drop a piece into the pot. The shell gathers the cloud, an old sailor promised, and the brew runs clearer. If the shell is not to hand, a thimble of cold water poured at the end urges the silt toward the bottom. You can almost hear that final hush when the water goes calm, and the lid agrees to stop arguing. The porridge asks for sweetness it may or may not get. Someone stirs with a patience that makes sugar unnecessary. Maybe there is a heel of bread that went too dry last night, and will be kind again when introduced to steam. Maybe there is a scrap of syrup saved from a baker's favor. Maybe there is only the honest company of heat, which, if you are wise, is luxury enough. A spoon taps pot edge twice in a language all kitchens understand. Ready. Uncertainty leans on the jam and keeps its voice gentle. Historians still argue how common coffee truly was among the poorer travelers who found barn corners like yours, whether tea, barley broth, or roasted grain coffee, stood in its place most mornings, and whether public outbuildings offered hot drink to wayfarers or kept kettles strictly for household and stable hands. Ledgers track pounds of beans and chests of tea. Diaries speak of a cup, and the distance between the two is a guess thickened with steam. You are content to be warmed by the possibility. Steam creeps under your blanket's hem and decides to stay. The green edge of the boot shoe you wore on your wrists earlier meets the roasted smell halfway, and for a moment, the barn becomes a hillside with a hearth. Your stomach notices without complaint. You promise it courtesy later. For now, your job is to lie still while porridge knits itself into breakfast for people who have to be vertical sooner than you do. A fringe superstition tiptoes by the doorsill. Stir porridge only clockwise, someone's aunt said, or you invite the day to go backward. Another claim that turning the kettle so its spout faces east makes guests more likely to knock. You consider neither necessary. The boy's spoon is a clock all by itself, and you are not expecting guests who need the help of a compass. A shadow crosses your corner when the door opens to let steam out and light in. The hinge you taught manners last night answers with only a courteous vowel. Tin kisses tin. Ladle meets bowl. A quiet thank you passes between hands that work together every dawn. Some of that thanks reaches you by accident and does you good on purpose. You tuck the blanket higher and borrow the world's warmth without taking its work. When the kettle is lifted, It gives one last polite hiss, as if to bow. The porridge settles into its own silence. Starch doing what starch does, turning hunger into weight you can carry. Your breath takes the rhythm it offers. You become heavier by listening. The stall reliable minister of comfort adds its amen. The morning you can smell will wait for you a little while longer, which is the kindest thing a morning can do. Light arrives as a patient idea before it becomes a thing. A thin blade slips between boards, finds a knothole, and lays a gold coin on the dust. The coin breaks into 1,000 motes that begin to drift like a slow parade. You roll your head an inch, and the parade changes direction, proving that vision is something you do together with the sun. The beam climbs your blanket and gives it a gentler color. Straw turns from argument to gold thread. Even the ox looks richer for no reason but mourning. One plain fact straightens its waistcoat. Barns and stores around Cape Town in this century often keep windows small and high, more slit and vent, than view to protect thatch and fodder, while admitting just enough light to tell work from sleep. Lime wash outside throws brightness back at the day. Inside, light arrives as stripes. You live inside those stripes for a while and let them do what bells cannot. Make waking feel civil. A fringe tidbit, more garden than barn, sits on your sill in memory. People set sprigs of rosemary or wild mint where sun touches them, to sweeten the room by noon. Others hold a palm into a moted beam and make a silent wish as the specks pass, counting 10 as insurance. You lift your hand, feel warmth on the knuckles, and discover that wishes can be small enough to fit in a beam. Uncertainty leans on the ladder and keeps its voice polite. Historians still argue whether town barns here used built louvers and fixed vents as a matter of plan, or relied mostly on casual gaps and the good luck of thatch. Plans survive for proud houses more than for their modest outbuildings, and inventories list windows without admitting their size. You accept whatever arrangement gave you this column of drifting gold. The beam makes study of every mote it finds: hay dust, feather, flower ghost from a spilled sack, wrote on your sleeve. You test the trick of breathing slower so the particles sink, as if each exhale were a hand settling a cloth. You turn your pillow to find a brighter patch and let the coin of light warm your jaw through wool, the way a hearth warms ankles by rumor only. The boy's broom returns, and in the beam, each bristle draws a pale line that becomes visible only long enough to forget. The room smells like sun now wood, warm just enough to remember sap, rope warm just enough to hint at tar, leaf warm just enough to say hillside. The door you train sleeps through a gust and wakes only to agree. You listen to the dust's slow applause as it lands somewhere out of your way. You think, not unkindly, that dust-like travel never really leaves. It just learns where to stand, so it doesn't need attention. You close your eyes and keep the beam on your face a little longer, because that is the sort of luck you can afford. In your pocket, the clove you saved remembers its ship and is content to be quiet. Morning, and motes proceed without orders. You let them. The steward returns, with a slate under his arm and a pouch that sounds like small weather. He counts heads the way bakers count rolls without drama, and notes corners as if corners were names. Your corner becomes a stroke on the slate. Your name, spelled as you offered it, becomes the day's modest treaty. He kneels, checks that the jug still wears its cloth, and asks soft as sweeping if you will be another night. You answer with a hand that has decided no, and he watches the decision land without scaring it. One plain fact sits down between the two of you. Coin at the Cape in your century is a mixture riksdollars and shillings, stuvers and doits and barns that act like inns, collect small fees or favors to keep order. Straw turned, water fetched, a hinge encouraged. Receipts may be chalk on slate rather than paper, but the arithmetic is as honest as the floor. He weighs your coins and puts them to sleep in his pouch. A fringed tidbit whispers from somebody's pocket. Cross a coin with your thumb before you pay, so it travels safely and returns, or spit, politely, barely on a copper to make change come easier next time. You only warm your coin in your palm and hand it over. Warmth makes metal less like argument and more like promise. Uncertainty keeps its hat on and speaks gently. Historians still argue whether such payments were civic fixed, recorded, answerable to a council or private, a steward's household economy, with drink guild and gratitude standing in for fees. Papers list fines and rates for many things, but the exact price of a corner of straw often lives only in someone's memory. Your coins tonight are enough for honesty without a receipt. He makes a second inventory, the one that does not write. Your blanket folded nearly square, your shoes heel to heel, your straw lip neat where feet will pass. He nods once, small praise that costs him nothing and enriches you a little. Then he rounds the bar names, corners, a quiet rebuke for the man who thought windrows were suggestions, and returns to the door with the ease of a person who knows every hinge by its favorite complaint. You set aside one thin coin for the water carrier whose ruts reach this threshold, and slip it into your left shoe, so you will remember generosity when you stand. The coin presses like a suggestion. You will remove it later and put it where gratitude belongs. For now, you are the kind of person who remembers to remember. The slate clicks against the doorpost as the steward adds one more mark. He wipes his chalk on the edge of his coat and leaves a neat white weather there, that little cape every working man wears without noticing. He tips 2 fingers at you and at the ox with equal courtesy and goes to speak kindly to a broom that leaned the wrong way. You lie back and let the arithmetic finish itself. Numbers leave the room lighter than they found it. Your corner, recorded and soon to be erased, feels more like yours for having been briefly ink on a list. You smooth the blanket where your name just lived and count one more breath into the ledger the barn keeps without paper. A polite, spaced tapping visits your shoulder through the blanket. Drip, pause, drip. The roof has remembered one nail it wishes were elsewhere, and overnight the northwester stitched a narrow seam of water that now auditions for your attention. You move your pallet 3 inches, then 4, and the drip follows with the loyalty of a badly trained dog. You move again, and the drip loses your scent. For a few breaths, you are victorious. One plain fact opens an umbrella of words. Winter at the Cape belongs to the north. Westerly rains, and thatch thick, clever, tied with riempes over poles sheds most of it, sending tidy sheets down to the drip line. But a reed out of place or a bird's mischief makes a thread, and threads become drops. Barns forgive drops, until drops become opinions. You practice forgiveness because it is faster than carpentry, a fringe trick taught by every shed that ever leaked. Tie a cord or slip a straw from the wet place down into a pot. Water loves a path and will leave your blanket to follow a better invitation. You rig a simple rain string, anchor it with a peg, and place your tin cup where it can feel useful. The drip obeys instantly, as if manners were always available, but rarely asked for properly. Uncertainty taps its pencil against the beam. Historians still argue which materials, wheat straw, restio, reed covered most town barns in your decades, and whether tarred pinning or clay dressing sealed ridgelines as a rule or a remedy. Contracts and accounts speak of thatch, as if the word were one plant and one practice. The droplet does not care about botany. It attends your chord like a student who has found the right desk. The sound changes from shoulder to cup, ping, a little tin hymn that counts minutes without making them feel heavy. You place your hand under the thread of water for a second and feel it go cool and clear. A traveling vein cuts safely into a smaller course. Your blanket recovers its temper. The ox returns to being a stove. The door keeps its new good behavior because you bribed it with soap last night. Another modest custom, half superstition, half sense. If rain wakes you, thank it under your breath and ask it to wash your road rather than your bed. You do not require the favor, but asking puts your mouth in a shape that resembles patience, and patience makes blankets warmer. You thank the rain. The cup answers on the next ping, as if to say it heard. The barn's smell changes by a finger width. Wet thatch, faint as tea. Damp timber remembering a river it met a long time ago. Straw that will want turning later. The boy will bring a fork. The wind, when it changes its politics, will finish the job. You keep your corner narrow and dry, and let the cup prove that humility can be musical. For a long breath you listen to water choosing the path you gave it, and decide that most of sleep is exactly that, setting threads where needs can run without soaking the rest of you. The drip behaves. You exhale into your small tent of blanket, and become heavier by a measure of one tin ping at a time. You inherit a cloak for an hour, a dark, tar-scented length that a groom lays over you when he passes, as casually as a person might toss a word to a friend. It smells like harbor arithmetic, pitch and rope, a ghost of train oil, the clean iron of wet rings, and a breath of salt that has walked far inland. You pull it to your chin, and the barn turns, for a moment, into a quay under cloud. Gulls replaced by pigeons with better manners. One plain fact leans on the doorframe and looks toward the bay. Cape Town's roadstead in your century is a ledger of arrivals, Dutch, English, and others rigging tarred to endure. Sails patched, casks rolled, with train oil and fish oils traveling as lamp promise and leather help. That smell enters lanes with sailors' boots and lingers in cloaks and canvas long after anchors lift. Your borrowed warmth carries the proof, a fringe tidbit, equal parts remedy and myth. Some swear a few drops of lemon rubbed into a tar streak break its pride, while others say butter persuades pitch to leave cloth better than soap will. A sailor laughed and said both things can be true if you are patient enough to pretend. You keep the cloak exactly as it is and let it tell its story. Uncertainty folds the cloak's collar and speaks respectfully. Historians still argue how commonly such oiled or tarred outerwear sailors canvas. Oilskins passed into the hands of shore workers here, and whether cloaks in barns were loaned as routine or offered only when the weather had opinions. Records write inventories of tools and tack. Garments drift between pages. Your hour of mercy will leave no mark in a ledger, and is therefore entirely real. Heat keeps to your shoulders and knows how not to argue. The tar ghost, strong at first, softens into the background until it is only the smell of a city that makes ships honest. You find that you are warmer for having a story over you, even if the story is mostly rope. The boy's footsteps learn a quieter way to pass when he sees the cloak. The pigeons debate nothing at all. The cup you set to rain does its small work like a clerk in love with numbers. Another small sailor's custom visits. Touch the edge of a borrowed coat and think of home so it knows it is doing its work for the right person. You touch the hem. Invent a home that is mostly a roof that does not leak, and the hem seems satisfied. Your hands take on a faint sweetness from the lemon peel you tucked earlier. Tar and citrus make a treaty on your skin. When the groom returns, he takes the cloak back, with the same quiet he used in lending it. You feel for a breath the absence of a smell, which is another way to know a city. The barn's resident warmth resumes its office. You tuck the blanket higher, keep the lemon where it was, and let your corner forget the harbor without pretending it isn't nearby. Kindness arrives in crumbs and geometry. A neighbor in the next corner tears a biscuit and leaves half, where your hand will find it when your eyes are still morning blind. You tilt the piece toward your mouth and discover that stale can be persuaded by steam into generosity. He nods without territorial rights to your gratitude and goes back to pretending to sleep. You repay with a tug that straightens his blanket's foot where it had begun to draft. Treaties need no witnesses. One plain fact takes a seat near your straw bolster. Buchu harvested on the hills has long been used here to scent water, bedding, and bodies. A Cape habit that moves across tongues. So do karosses, sheepskin cloaks that outlast arguments, wrapped over knees in winter and under ribs at night. Comfort at the Cape is a braid of local leaf and traded wool, and most people learn both by necessity rather than by lecture. A fringe tidbit carried from a herd, boys laugh. Press your open palm once firmly into the pallet where your ribs lie and leave the print bed mark, he called it. He swears dreams return to that exact spot more quickly on later nights. You try it. Your handprint briefly darkens the straw and vanishes. Perhaps the dream will remember even if the mark does not. Uncertainty leans on its broom and keeps its tone light. Historians still argue how freely kindness crossed the lines that law and custom drew free and enslaved. Burgher and Coy, company and private when knights and barns made neighbors. Ledgers can be particular, and diaries too polite, while corners share biscuits without annotations. Your half biscuit belongs to the record that never gets written and yet survives. You tend small improvements because they are the only ones you can own. You rake a finer lip to keep the boy's next sweep from collecting your bedding. You retie your pillow with a knot that learned couthness overnight. You slip one extra stalk into the straw ring at your feet and feel the roof lift by a hair. Patience, you find, is also a pillow. You try your spoon once the thought, not the edge, and decide it is time to be the sort of person who will stand up soon without complaint. The cup at the leak pings once more and then retires. The door repeats the single vowel you taught it. The ox posts another breath on the ledger of heat. Your corner, almost ready to be memory, behaves like a place you were glad to borrow. Another gentle custom. Before you leave a sleeping floor, smooth the hollow you made and lay one straight handful of clean straw where your head was. It is not about luck, only about saying, "I used this, and it forgave me." You practice the sentence without yet standing to speak it. Your palm remembers the shape. For now, you stretch 1 foot an inch, then the other, and learn that the night has forgiven you your bones. The biscuit tastes of steam and somebody else's thoughtfulness. You decide you are warmer than you deserve, and exactly as warm as the room intends. In that arithmetic lies the only comfort that lasts. Packing quiet is a task with more folds than cloth. You begin with the blanket. Shake it once to return other people's dust to the air. Then fold in long, calm halves so the scratch argues with itself, instead of with your skin later. Your pillow-ambitious coat unlaces, exhales, and becomes a coat again. You smooth its seam as if apology were heat. Shoes brushed with 2 invisible strokes return to the profession of being shoes. One plain fact clears its throat. Barns like this are not sleeping houses first. They are works rooms, and work expects to find them ready, straw raked, floor swept, tools where a hand can find them still half asleep. Travelers who understand this earn permission to come back. Travelers who don't learn the shape of a different threshold. You practice belonging by taking up less space, even in leaving. A fringe tidbit with more poetry than proof. Turn your shoes so their toes face the door when you rise, so the road knows it is expected, and touch the lintel lightly to thank the roof for not falling while you borrowed it. You turn the shoes, you touch the lintel. The gesture gives your fingers something to remember when your mouth is busy with a yawn. Uncertainty, amiable as ever, remarks. Historians still argue whether courtesies like coins left under straw or a swept lip at your own expense were habits of a few or customs enough to notice. Records care about rents and rates more than about the grammar of gratitude. Sweeping is easier than scholarship. So you sweep. You lift your straw ring and scatter it so the next sleeper will not inherit your engineering without consent. You roll the extra neat windrow to the boys' bin rather than pretend it is part of the floor. The water jug keeps its cloth. The ladle lies down to the right of the post the way you found it. Your spoon crosswise all night turns lengthwise now to mean begin again, as kitchen spoons do when nobody is looking. The steward glances across from the door and performs the smallest nod. Acknowledgement paid in a currency you prefer to coin. He rubs the hinge with a habit you taught last night and pretends he invented it. You accept the arrangement as a model for living improvements passed around until they belong to the room, not to any particular hand. One more breath, and your palate is a patch of ordinary floor again, which is what palates want to become when the hour is honest. You pat the straw once bed mark in reverse, maybe, and the barn answers with a wooden vowel that tells you everything left behind has learned to be quiet. Your coat sits on your shoulders with a competence you had not expected from it. You stand slowly so the day does not startle. The room adjusts its balance and does not spill. Your corner has already forgotten your name, which is correct. You keep the forgetting kind by keeping your feet soft, your thanks brief, your back unbent, until outside asks you for posture. Work waits beyond. Inside, you have only this left, to step carefully toward the door and leave your weight behind. Morning is rinsed linen hung on the mountain's line. The air outside the door tastes like stone and salt argued into peace. And the windless doctor now, more nurse, straightens your hat with a hand that means well. The lane has been swept into straight sentences. Thresholds say, good morning in sand and water. Far off, the bay holds ships like coins on a blue palm. Nearer, someone's hearth edits yesterday's smoke into a promise about bread. One plain fact puts its finger on the map. Table Mountain's tablecloth of cloud is common talk, here arriving with southeaster days, departing when the air remembers other chores, and the town reads the sky the way it reads bells, making errands and tempers to match the cloth. Today the table is bare, the sun sure of its angles, and the streets want feet. A fringe habit, half superstition, half civility. Tap the door frame twice on your way out of a place that sheltered you once for thanks, once for permission, and step over the threshold rather than on it, so you do not press luck too thin. You give the frame its taps, and step the way you were taught by no one you can name. Uncertainty lingers at the edge of the lane. Historians still argue whether this was ever truly the mayor's barn in title, or simply a generous outbuilding that wore an easier name. Offices here are Dutch and Company, and Council all at once. Kindnesses ignore coats of arms. The board you slept above will not testify either way, and the wind refuses to extradite memory. You accept that your night belonged to wood and straw more than to any office. The steward writes your absence on the slate with a small erased line. The boy leans his broom and carries 2 buckets as if they are a matched argument. The groom inspects hooves that will meet miles. Your coin in your left shoe reminds you not to forget the water carrier. You remove it and make the exchange at the pump, where gratitude circulates better than water. You look back once, not to memorize barns, do not like to be stared at, but to confirm that your corner is now someone else's luck. The door you trained says no words and needs none. Pigeons, already done with philosophy for the day. Pretend rafters are plain beams. The ox has become a partner in labor again. Warmth a byproduct rather than a gift. You prefer gifts when they are unintentional. Road underfoot, air unargued. You begin the day's arithmetic with the same tools you used to end the nights. Patience, breath, small good manners. If a tavern laugh drifts in later, it will be thinner than last night. If a bell speaks, you will let it mean what it intends. For now, boots on swept sand make almost no sound at all, and that silence feels like a bed you can carry. You do not wish for an inn. You do not wish for a feather bed. You wish to be the kind of person who leaves places better than he found them and is welcome again. The mayor's barn, whoever the mayor was, has its own ledger of such wishes, kept without ink. You add yours by walking away without needing one more thing. The road does not rush you. It lets you find your pace. A length of breath folded into another length of breath, until even your steps forget to make news. Behind you, the barn shrinks to a thought that no longer requires effort. A rectangle of wood and straw held in place by a morning that has already moved on to other errands. Dust lifts, drifts, and remembers to settle. A cart turns into a lane, and then into a memory of a lane. You keep to the edge where shade says what it can, and small stones do not insist. The hat brim you pulled low for sleep remains low for light. The coat that was a pillow now mines your shoulders with the same unshowy competence. Air tastes like clean boards and a little salt, and the faintest herb still lives at your wrist, so the day is partly hillside wherever you carry it. Far away, a bell counts nothing in particular. You let it. What needed doing is already done. The blanket is folded, the straw is smooth, the hinge remembers kindness, the coin has found the right palm. Warmth that was borrowed has returned itself without ceremony. You have only ordinary things to attend: a cup, a crust, a direction. There is no conversation to rehearse, no story asking to be told faster than walking. You pass a wall streaked with lime, and it gives your shadow back without judgment. If thoughts begin to gather, you let them stand quietly at a distance and do not give them names yet. Names can wait for another hour, another corner. For now, you aim at nothing more ambitious than arriving when you arrive, with shoes that continue to behave, and a mouth that remembers water. The mountain wears no cloth. The beam of light you borrowed is now somebody else's, and the day goes on, extending itself politely in front of you, as if it had measured your stride and approved. We hope this steady drift through the rougher edges of history has been a gentle one. If it's left you thoughtful, you're welcome to like, share, or write a calm comment. And if you'd like to linger longer in the past, you can subscribe for the next slow story. End of script. Sweet dreams.